Chapter 775. When a sage was angry, the world would be turned upside down. This was not just a saying, it was an eternal truth. When Nuwa revealed the inviolable majesty of a sage, the heavens, the earth, and the starry skies suddenly froze. The silence was frightening. Everyone was speechless, but they all looked at Yi Xian with pity. Nuwa's will was inviolable, and the two demon emperors would not die today. During the great god investiture tribulation, Tao ancestor Hongjun issued a decree that sages were not allowed to fight. Do you want to go against Tao ancestor Hongjun's decree? Yi Xian stood with his halberd. His face was as gloomy as water. His attitude was neither arrogant nor servile, but his voice was extremely cold. If the person standing in front of him was not a real sage, he would not have lowered himself to talk to him. He would have killed him with his halberd. Unfortunately, Yi Xian understood very well. He was also very calm. At this moment, he was facing a real sage, a supreme existence in the world. Not to mention that he was now seriously injured. Even if he was in his peak condition, even if he had the Chaos Empyrean formation, he would not be a match for Nuwa. Endure he could only endure. If he could not endure, and allowed Nuwa to find a reason to kill him, he would definitely suffer a life and death calamity today. Eastern Emperor Tai and Emperor Jun helped me attain Tao. I must repay this favor. Even if I go against Tao ancestor Hongjun's decree, I must save their lives. Nuwa spoke calmly without any anger. Just as she said, the favor of attaining Tao was great. If it was not for the help of the two demon emperors in the past, she would not have been able to become a sage through merit. This was the so-called cycle of karma. If she did not save the two of them today, a flaw would appear in her sage heart. Moreover, this was not the most important problem. The most important problem was that Nuwa was already involved in this war. If Yi Xian was allowed to continue growing, until Yi Xian became the seventh sage, Yi Xian would definitely find him to settle today's karma. The karma of a sage was too terrifying. This was definitely not the result that Nuwa wanted to see. Therefore, saving the two demon emperors was secondary. At this moment, Nuwa seemed calm, but she was weighing a matter in her heart. This matter was related to Yi Xian's life and death. Since Nuwa has spoken, how can Yi Xian disobey? Yi Xian gradually calmed down. He would definitely not give Nuwa a chance to kill him. This was because Yi Xian's undying true spirit was trembling, reminding him that Nuwa wanted to kill him. Yi Xian's intuition was too terrifying. Nuwa seemed calm and quiet, but Yi Xian could feel the faint killing intent from her. He was extremely sure that if he dared to refuse, he would die in Nuwa's hands in the next moment. Yi Xian really wanted to kill Donghuang Tai and Di Jun. However, he could not do so now. Killing the two of them was not a big deal. If he gave Nuwa a chance to kill him, he would be doomed eternally. It was not that Yi Xian did not want to resist, nor was it that Yi Xian chose to compromise. It was because he was powerless to resist Nuwa. He did not even have the slightest chance of winning. It was not that there was no one in this world who could keep Goddess Nviwa in check. The other 5 sages were all more powerful than Goddess Nviwa, but they were also fellow disciples. Moreover, from the early years of the untainted land to the present world, Goddess Nviwa had never participated in the fight between the sages. Among the 6 sages, she had the most harmonious relationship. How could the other 5 sages offend her? Besides the 5 sages, Yi Xian thought of another person, someone who had once saved his life, and was suspected to be his future self. Even Nuwa was extremely wary of this person back then. This person was so powerful that even sages were afraid of him. However, Yi Xian did not dare to take the risk. This was because the person who was suspected to be his future self had said that he had only returned to the past to make up for his regrets. He did not really live in this time and space. It seemed that the person had some kind of fear. He was lonely and bleak, with a sad aura around him. He had also told Yi Xian that he was the one who lived in this world. If he wanted to change the future, only Yi Xian could do it. Traveling through time and space was the most mysterious and unpredictable. Reversing the river of time was definitely not that easy. Yi Xian understood this very well. If the person who was suspected to be his future self was so powerful, he could have killed Nuwa in Nuwa Palace in the past, and wiped out all his enemies. There would not be so many things happening today. Obviously, that person could not do as he pleased. He must have paid a huge price for reversing the river of time. If Yi Xian really hoped that his future self would appear, this was definitely not the result that Yi Xian wanted. He could not afford to gamble. He could not afford to gamble at all. Yi Xian could not use his own life as a wager. This was a method that left his life in the hands of others. Whether it was retreating or being a coward, Yi Xian could only choose to endure. Because if he endured this today, when he became a sage in the future, he would definitely cut Nuwa into pieces to avenge today's humiliation. Wang, the heaven-destroying halberd, moved away from the two demonic emperors. Yi Xian looked at the two demonic emperors deeply. Under the two demonic emperors' cold gazes, Yi Xian suddenly turned around and returned to the 33rd Celestial Court. Wait! Suddenly, without waiting for Yi Xian to take 3 steps, Nuwa's cold voice sounded again. This also made Yi Xian squint his eyes slightly and stop in his tracks. However, he did not turn around. May I know what Nuwa wants? Yi Xian said in a low voice. However, his eyes were bloodshot. It was obvious that he was suppressing the anger in his heart. Is the 7th Hong Meng Immortal Vapor in your hands? Nuwa's voice was cold. Although she seemed to be asking Yi Xian a question, she gave off a feeling of superiority. Hiss! Everyone gasped. Everyone's eyes were focused on Yi Xian. The various quasi-sages looked at Yi Xian with burning eyes. This was because this was a sage asking a question. If Yi Xian dared to lie, the sage's senses would definitely detect it. Hong Meng Immortal Vapor was a matter of great importance. It was also related to the birth of the 7th heaven-destined sage. How could it not attract the attention of everyone? So what if it's here? So what if it's not? Even a clay figurine would have a temper, let alone an extremely ferocious person like Yi Xian. Yi Xian slowly turned to look at Nuwa. His eyes were extremely gloomy, and there was even a trace of understanding in his eyes. Nuwa wanted to attack him. This simple sentence explained the current situation. Yi Xian would definitely not be wrong. Although he had spared the lives of the 2 demon emperors, Nuwa still wanted a yard after taking an inch, and was using this as an excuse to make things difficult for him. If the Hong Meng Immortal Vapor is in your hands, then give it to me. If it's not, then pretend that I didn't say anything, Nuwa said sternly. It's not here. Yi Xian's expression was extremely cold. However, he could only suppress his anger and give Nuwa an answer that was neither true nor false. At this moment, the Hong Meng Immortal Vapor was indeed not in Yi Xian's hands. This was because the Nether River Patriarch had retreated from the battle and had already returned to the Nether Blood Sea with the Hong Meng Immortal Vapor. Yi Xian was also not lying. Chapter 776. A saint's senses were extremely sensitive, but Yi Xian was indeed telling the truth. Nuwa could naturally sense that Yi Xian was not lying. Alright, I believe you. Nuwa nodded slowly. No one could lie in front of a saint, so she chose to believe Yi Xian. Farewell. The anger in Yi Xian's heart had already reached its limit, and he felt extremely humiliated. However, he endured it and did not flare up, because he would not give Nuwa a chance to attack him. Yi Xian held his halberd and was about to leave again, but this time, before he could take a step, a beam of holy light quietly blocked his path. This also made Yi Xian clench his fists tightly, the veins on his forehead squirming like earthworms. May I know if Goddess Nuwa has anything else to say? Yi Xian turned around again, but this time, his eyes were even more gloomy. A ferocious look appeared in his eyes, and he raised the heaven-destroying halberd in his hand slightly. Looking at Yi Xian's gradually unfriendly expression, the holy light around Nuwa paused slightly, and a hint of fear flashed across her eyes. She had never forgotten the person who had appeared in Nuwa Palace back then. This also made her hesitate for a moment, but she quickly threw this hesitation to the back of her mind. The great tribulation of heaven and earth, and all living beings fall into oblivion. Now that the 3 realms have been pierced through, you have caused a great disaster, and caused all living beings in the 3 realms to suffer a great calamity. Don't tell me you want to leave just like that? Nuwa said coldly. Hiss. As Nuwa's words fell, everyone's expression changed slightly. They quietly looked at Nuwa, and their eyes flashed with uncertainty. Favoritism, naked favoritism. Nuwa was clearly favoring the ancient demon court, and she wanted to push all the responsibility to Yi Xian. She was clearly using this as an excuse to punish Yi Xian. Now, even a fool could tell that Nuwa was using this as an excuse to make things difficult for Yi Xian. One had to know that the great tribulation of heaven and earth was started by the ancient demon court, and the ancient demon court was the instigator. However, Nuwa had pushed the blame to Yi Xian. This was clearly a great injustice. However, no one present dared to stand up for Yi Xian, because what a saint said was the truth. Only someone who was tired of living would stand up for Yi Xian. Humiliation, a great humiliation. It could even be called a great humiliation. At this moment, Yi Xian's face was extremely red, and the heaven-destroying halberd in his hand was trembling slightly. Yi Xian looked at Nuwa with an extremely terrifying killing intent. The strong were as heavy as a mountain, and the weak were like ants. This was the law of this world. The weak had no right to speak, and could not resist at all. If a saint said that you were wrong, then you were wrong. All explanations would be useless. At this moment, Yi Xian completely understood that Nuwa had no intention of letting him leave today. No matter how much he endured, he would only be met with a certain death. Then what do you want? Clang! Yi Xian stabbed his halberd into the ground, and the entire ancient demon court shook violently. Since enduring was useless, there was no need for him to endure any longer. He wanted to see what Nuwa wanted. When Yi Xian displayed his monstrous ferocity and faced Nuwa directly, everyone felt their hair stand on end. They looked at Yi Xian as if he was crazy. Oh no, something big is going to happen. Is this Yi Xian crazy? He actually dares to be disrespectful to Lady Nuwa. Could it be that he's courting death? Celestial Emperor, hurry up and apologize to Mother Nuwa. Kuan Peng had woken up at some point. At this moment, half of his body had exploded, but he was still weakly transmitting his voice to Yi Xian. Unfortunately, Yi Xian did not respond. He looked at Nuwa with a fierce gaze, and a raging fire burned in his eyes. The world is in chaos, and all living things are suffering. As the instigator, you must be punished. Your pre-saint cultivation will be destroyed, and you will be sealed in Nuwa's palace for 8 million years. Only then will you be forgiven for your sins, Nuwa said sternly, ignoring Yi Xian's murderous intent. Haha. Suddenly, Yi Xian let out a wild laugh. He seemed to be unable to catch his breath from laughing, and only after a few breaths did his wild laughter stop. However, his following actions caused everyone to be completely stunned on the spot. They simply couldn't believe their own eyes. Destroy my cultivation? Have you asked my heaven-destroying halberd? Boom boom boom. The halberd flew across the sky, and a vicious aura shot into the sky. Boundless darkness covered the sky, and a terrifying chaotic fog surrounded Yi Xian. Under everyone's incredulous gaze, Yi Xian's face was ferocious and cruel. When he took a step forward, the ground beneath his feet cracked, and he attacked Nuwa with his halberd. Attacking a saint? Yi Xian dared to attack a saint? When this scene appeared, everyone was scared silly on the spot. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. When the world was created, all living things were born. Saints had always been high and mighty. No one had ever heard of any living thing daring enough to attack a saint. Crazy Yi Xian was completely crazy. At this moment, this thought appeared in everyone's mind. They could not understand why Yi Xian dared to do this, if he was not crazy. Did Yi Xian not know the consequences of his actions? Did he not know that he would die? Just as everyone was in a daze, they saw a ray of holy light that was like a waterfall of heaven and earth. It sent Yi Xian flying, and the heaven-destroying halberd in his hand fell to the ground with a clang. Puffed! Yi Xian spat out a mouthful of blood. A terrifying wound appeared on his chest, and his white bones were faintly discernible. His entire body crashed heavily to the ground. There was no earth-shattering power, nor was there any scene of destruction. It was just a ray of holy light, and it had severely injured Yi Xian to the ground. The power of a saint was the power of heaven and earth. Every move of a saint contained the power of heaven and earth. Not to mention that Yi Xian was already severely injured. Even if he was at his peak, he would not be able to withstand a saint's attack. Everyone below a saint is an ant. Since you are so stubborn, I have no choice but to destroy your soul and scatter it between heaven and earth. Niwa spoke in a dignified manner. The holy light around her bloomed faintly. Although it did not have the power to destroy mountains and rivers, it was enough to make anyone who saw it feel extremely terrified. Cough, cough, cough. A series of light coughs came from Yi Xian's mouth. Niwa frowned. Yi Xian actually supported himself on the ground with his arms and slowly stood up. However, blood foam kept flowing out of his mouth, and blue veins were wriggling on his forehead, proving how much pain he was suffering at the moment. A saint's attack seemed casual, but it was not something that Yi Xian could withstand. If his physical body was not comparable to that of an ancestral sorcerer, any other sage-to-be would have been sent flying, and their physical body would have been shattered to pieces, and they would have died. Niwa, you bitch. If I, Yi Xian, don't die today, I will tear you into pieces one day, and make sure that you will never be reincarnated. Yi Xian stood up, bathed in blood. He stared at Niwa with his blood-red eyes. He was like an evil spirit that had crawled out of hell, as he roared at Niwa. If looks could kill, Niwa would have been cut into pieces. Chapter 777. Insulting a saint. This was a crime that was punishable by death. There was no room for negotiation. Empress Niwa's face was flushed. Her graceful and dignified face was filled with killing intent. Clearly, she was really angry. She, like a divine whip of heaven and earth, like the 9 heavens and the Milky Way. The heaven and earth were twisted to the extreme. Niwa casually shot out a beam of holy light and sent Yi Xian flying again. Bang! The power of a saint was terrifying. This blow directly caused Yi Xian's chest to explode. Once again he fell heavily to the ground. No one knew whether he was dead or alive. Brother! Celestial Emperor! Husband! The people of the celestial court cried out in grief. However, they were powerless in the face of a saint. This was a fatal situation. Little ant, how dare you insult a saint? You deserve to die. Empress Niwa's face was murderous. Her voice was extremely cold. Her eyes were flashing with killing intent. Her slender hands were emitting holy light. Clearly Yi Xian, this disaster could not be left alive today. Yi Xian, aren't you very arrogant? Get up and kill us two brothers. Haha. Emperor Jun was covered in blood. His teeth had been broken by Yi Xian. At this moment he was shouting incoherently. Extremely wild and excited laughter came from his mouth. Humans are like ants. They don't know the power of heaven. Empress Niwa is one of the 6 great saints. If she wants you dead, how can you survive? Dong Huangtai growled coldly. Ba Yi Tiandi? What bullshit, celestial court. How dare you insult a saint? Just this alone will make you die without a burial place. Immortal Wang of the South Pole stomped his feet and scolded, gloating. He looked at Yi Xian, as if he was looking at a dead man. Amipa, Duo Bao Rilai chanted the mantra of the merciful Buddha, and looked at Yi Xian indignantly. Yi Xian, you are a demon who has wreaked havoc in the 3 realms. First you slaughtered all the living beings in the 3 realms. Then you insulted the saints. Today you will die. That's right. Such a scourge should be killed. I implore your highness Niwa to punish him and return peace to the heaven, earth and man realms. The emperor of Fengdu spoke righteously and even bowed to Niwa. Ridicule, mockery, ridicule, contempt, and even more ruthless and silent killing intent. When Niwa made a move against Yi Xian, the various forces added insult to injury. They looked at Yi Xian with cruel expressions because everyone knew that Yi Xian would not live past today. Yi Xian, you piece of trash. Weren't you very arrogant just now? Why are you lying on the ground like a dead dog now? Why don't you stand up? Haha. Looking at Yi Xian lying on the ground covered in blood, Emperor Jun felt extremely refreshed. He even sneered. Obviously, he was in an extremely good mood that Yi Xian had fallen into such a state. Celestial Emperor. Looking at Yi Xian's miserable appearance, the few remaining Daluo Jingxian in the celestial court burst into tears. Even the 3 sages-to-be were in despair and speechless. They knew that they had lost their momentum. Ka ka ka. Suddenly, the sound of bones cracking could be heard, causing the mocking laughter to abruptly stop. It was all because Yi Xian had actually supported himself with his arms in an attempt to stand up. Covered in blood, and with his arms twisted, Yi Xian's body was trembling. However, his eyes were blood-red and mournful, as if he was using all his strength to stand up. Yi Xian's arms desperately supported himself on the ground, but his injuries were too severe. It was so severe that it was impossible for him to stand up again. Crack! The sound of bones cracking rang out. Yi Xian's arms were unable to bear the heavy burden as they snapped. His body, which had just been propped up, once again crashed to the ground. Puff! Yi Xian spat out a mouthful of blood. He was really going to die. At this moment, his mind was muddled, and he wanted to fall asleep. Haha! Look at this trash. He is already in such a state and still wants to hold on. Emperor Jun sneered after recovering from the shock. However, as Emperor Jun laughed, he felt that something was wrong. At this moment, all the forces were silent and focused on Yi Xian. You! Emperor Jun frowned. Just as he was about to say something, he saw a scene from the corner of his eye that made him feel sluggish. Yi Xian was badly mutilated, but he continued to squirm on the ground. Both of his arms were broken, and his pale white hand bones were exposed. However, he actually ignored the pain of his broken arm, and forcefully used his exposed hand bones to support himself on the ground in an attempt to stand up again. Ouch! Following an extremely painful groan from Yi Xian's mouth, he actually stood up shakily once again. However, his arms were continuously dripping with blood. His pale white hand bones were blood-red and mournful, causing one's soul to tremble to the extreme with a single glance. Such a scene made Emperor Jun speechless. He stared at Yi Xian in a daze. The sarcasm on his face gradually disappeared, and his fists were slightly clenched. Why are you still so persistent when you are in such a state? Don't you even want to submit to a sage? Emperor Jun roared loudly, and looked at Yi Xian with a complicated expression. Why? Why should I submit to a sage? Yi Xian's body was shaking, as if he would fall again at any time. However, his spine was still as straight as a pine tree. Even if the sky fell, it would not bend him at all. Do you know that you are going to die today? Why are you still lingering at death's door? Emperor Jun could not understand why Yi Xian was so stubborn. Even at this time, he was still so proud. Even in the face of a sage, he still did not show the slightest weakness. Not only Emperor Jun, but all the sages-to-be were looking at Yi Xian with a complicated expression, because no one could understand why Yi Xian was so stubborn that he could not even submit to a sage. Do you know why you can't become a sage? Yi Xian was in a trance. He was like a lamp that had run out of oil, and was surrounded by wisps of death qi. However, at this moment, he suddenly said such a sentence. Why? Emperor Jun murmured to himself. He suddenly looked at Yi Xian and said, if you want to become a sage, you naturally need the Hong Meng immortal qi. This is a well-known fact. Cough, cough, cough. Yi Xian was coughing violently, and blood was flowing out of his mouth. However, he looked at Emperor Jun calmly, without the slightest ripple. In the fight for the Great Way, if you don't advance, you will fall behind. The Hong Meng immortal qi is just a foreign object. Even if you become a sage, you will be shackled by heaven and earth. Not afraid of heaven and earth, not afraid of death. Even in the face of a sage, I have to have the heart to fight. This is also my dharma and Tao. If I have to submit to a sage, how can I, Yi Xian, become a sage in the future? Like a thunder in the chaos, like a huge wave in the Milky Way. When Yi Xian's voice resounded between heaven and earth, everyone was in a daze. They completely turned into clay puppets, silent and motionless. In the fight for the Great Way, if you don't advance, you will fall behind? Emperor Jun murmured to himself, his body and mind trembling. At this moment, he seemed to have understood something. He slightly clenched his fists, and a touch of bitterness flashed across his eyes. Chapter 778. That's right. It wasn't just him, Di Jun, who had always believed that if he wanted to become a saint, he would need the primordial violet qi. All the creatures in the world thought the same, and he was even more respectful towards saints. However, after hearing Yi Xian's words today, Dijun finally understood a principle that he hadn't understood since ancient times. If one did not have the will to fight against heaven and earth, and succumb to the sages forever, there would be a flaw in one's Taoist heart. How could one become a sage then? We've lost. We accept our loss wholeheartedly. Dong Huangtai's voice was extremely bitter. Even though Niuhua had killed Yi Xian today, Dong Huangtai was an extremely proud person. He finally knew why he and Dijun had lost to Yi Xian. It was not because of cultivation or the formation of heaven and earth, but because of their Taoist heart. Yi Xian, please accept my bow. Only you deserve the title of Heaven's Sovereign. From now on, Dijun and I are not worthy of it. Dong Huangtai bowed to Yi Xian. He had put aside the hostile relationship and sincerely bowed to Yi Xian because he accepted his loss wholeheartedly. Yi Tiandi, although I can't wait to kill you and eat your flesh and drink your blood, I accept my loss wholeheartedly today. Please accept my bow. Dijun bowed deeply to Yi Xian. There was no longer any sarcasm on his face. There was only shame and shame. The two great demon emperors were both peerless figures and had their own pride. They were definitely not sinister and cunning people. Today they had indeed lost. Not only had they lost, they had also lost in terms of their Tao hearts. This bow was also their respect for Yi Xian, and even more so for their great enemy. Yi Tiandi, if you and I were not enemies, we would definitely be willing to make friends with you. We would even be willing to drink and chat merrily with you. Unfortunately, an enemy is an enemy after all. Today, your death is the most shameful thing for us. Yi Tiandi, rest in peace. Dijun and Dong Huangtai bowed 3 times. Although Yi Xian was their enemy, they only admired him at this moment. They knew that if they were in Yi Xian's position, they would have already bowed to the sages and even knelt down. Heaven's Sovereign, rest in peace. Boom! Thousands of ancient demons, sages-to-be, and countless demon tribes all bowed to Yi Xian because Yi Xian was indeed a peerless figure. Yi was their respect for Yi Xian. He led the celestial court against the demon tribes of the 3 realms and suppressed the 2 demon emperors. He was fearless even in the face of a sage, and even dared to attack a sage. What happened today would forever be remembered in the 3 realms. It would let all living things know that there was once such a brilliant person in the past. Yi Xian would also become an immortal legend. The heavens and earth shook and all living things howled. They were respectfully sending off Yi Xian because from now on, there would be one less peerless figure in the world. At this moment, Niuhua's expression was unsettled, and her heart trembled to the extreme. This was because she was terrified to discover one thing. Yi Xian had actually caused everyone to acknowledge him, and they even felt great admiration for him from the bottom of their hearts. Even the 2 great demon emperors were convinced of his strength. Terrifying, too terrifying. Niuhua deeply understood that even the 6 great saints and all living things in the world might not be convinced. But Yi Xian had done it today. Niuhua stared fixedly at Yi Xian. Extreme fear flickered in her eyes, because she seemed to see a kind of radiance blossoming from Yi Xian's body. This kind of radiance was extremely terrifying. Even as a saint, she felt a sense of trepidation. If Yi Xian doesn't die today, he will definitely settle things with me when he becomes a saint in the future. Niuhua suddenly had this thought. It was as if there was a voice from the unseen world telling her that Yi Xian could not be left alive today. Otherwise, she would definitely suffer an unimaginable calamity in the future. Yi Xian must die. Suddenly, Niuhua's face turned extremely cold. She finally made up her mind. She could not let Yi Xian live. If Yi Xian lived, he would definitely be a calamity for her in the future. Rumble. The world shook and chaos lingered. Niuhua's body emitted sacred light. She lifted her slender hand, and the light that could annihilate all living things bloomed. She was obviously going to kill Yi Xian on the spot in the next moment, even if not leaving behind a trace of his soul. Am I going to die? Looking at Niuhua's cold and emotionless eyes, Yi Xian looked at the sky and asked himself. There was self-mockery and bitterness in his eyes. He was extremely unwilling. Yi Xian was unwilling to die here, because he still had a lot of things to do. However, he could not resist and had used up all his trump cards. Even if he used all his trump cards when he was at his peak, he would still be powerless against Niuhua. Only death awaited him. Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes. A trace of relief appeared on his face. Although he did not want to die, he had already come to this point. There was nothing he could do to reverse the situation. Wait! Suddenly, at this critical moment, a heavy voice rang out. Niwa frowned and looked towards the source of the voice. Yi Xian slowly opened his eyes. He did not know who could save his life at this time. Fellow Niwa, do you really want to kill him? Zhen Yuanzi, the ancestor of earthly immortals, was a person who had existed since the beginning of the world. He was also known as the ancestor of all immortals. His reputation was unimaginably great. If he was not only a quasi-sage, his reputation as the ancestor of all immortals would not be inferior to the 6 great sages of the world. Zhen Yuanzi, do you want to save him? Niwa said in a dignified voice. Her eyes were filled with great dissatisfaction. Yi Xian is fated with this penniless Taoist. How could this penniless Taoist not save him? Zhen Yuanzi was neither haughty nor humble when facing a sage. This was because he was the ancestor of earthly immortals. In the past, before Niwa became a sage, she also called him fellow Taoist, and they even had some friendship. Even death cannot wipe out his crimes for insulting a sage. You can't save him. Niwa said coldly. Since she had already made her decision, Yi Xian must die today. Buzz! Suddenly, ripples appeared in the void, and a guqin appeared in the void. When this guqin appeared, Niwa's expression changed slightly. She looked at Zhen Yuanzi with an extremely unfriendly gaze. In the past, I helped fellow Taoist Fuxi to become a quasi-sage. This Fuxi guqin was given to me by him. He also made a promise to me that if I ever need your help, I can use this Fuxi guqin to make you and your sister promise me one thing. I wonder if fellow Taoist Niwa will fulfill your brother's promise to me? Zhen Yuanzi said with a smile. Silence, silence, dead silence. Niwa looked at the Fuxi guqin with a complicated expression. This was her brother's spiritual treasure. She naturally knew that Fuxi owed Zhen Yuanzi a favor in the early years of the untainted land. However, she did not expect that Zhen Yuanzi would use this to ask her to spare Yi Xian's life. Chapter 779. Zhen Yuanzi, are you threatening me? Niwa's voice was icy cold. She looked at Zhen Yuanzi with an extremely unfriendly gaze. There was even a faint hint of anger in her eyes. Fellow Niwa, you're a saint. How would I dare to threaten you? It's just the cycle of karma. Today, I'm just asking for the favor that Fuxi owed me in the past. Zhen Yuanzi said tirelessly. As Zhen Yuanzi's words fell, Niwa's face became gloomy and uncertain. She was clearly in a state of great hesitation. As the saying goes, the love between siblings runs deep. If there was one person that Niwa cared about the most, it would be Fuxi because he was her elder brother. Today, Zhen Yuanzi came to ask for a favor from her. This put her in a dilemma. Everyone's breathing quickened. When Niwa fell into a dilemma, everyone's eyes also focused on her. This was because if Yi Xian did not die today, there would definitely be more variables in the future. Zhen Yuanzi, I can't agree to your request. After a full 10 breaths of time, Niwa hesitated no more. Her voice was cold and emotionless, as she directly rejected Zhen Yuanzi's request. This also caused Zhen Yuanzi's originally smiling expression to freeze. His brows were deeply furrowed together. Fellow Niwa, are you really going to ignore your elder brother? Zhen Yuanzi said in a low voice. The favor of the past will be repaid in the future. However, today Yi Xian must die. Niwa said coldly. She knew very well that Yi Xian was a great future trouble. If she spared his life today, if he really became a saint in the future, the two of them would not rest until one of them was dead. This was definitely not an outcome that she wanted to see. Back down. The laws of heaven and earth suddenly pressed down on Zhen Yuanzi, causing Zhen Yuanzi to retreat more than 10 steps. An extremely grave expression appeared on his face. Rumble. The holy light of heaven and earth once again descended as Niwa raised her jade-like hand. This time, no one could stop her from killing Yi Xian. Master. Suddenly, a beautiful figure quietly appeared in front of Yi Xian. The Empyrean fairy's eyes were filled with tears as she knelt on the ground and repeatedly kowtowed to Niwa. Clear tears flowed down her cheeks and dripped to the ground. Mystic fairy, go away. Niwa was startled. and her voice was cold and emotionless. "Master, if you want to kill someone, then kill me. I only beg that you spare his life." Empyrean Fairy begged humbly, as she stood firmly in front of Yi Xian. "Hurry up and leave. You can't stop her." Yi Xian had never thought that the Empyrean Fairy would actually stand in front of him when he was about to die. This made Yi Xian's expression extremely complicated. He wanted to pull the Empyrean Fairy up and get her to leave as soon as possible. This was because Yi Xian could already tell that Nuwa would not let her go today. Even though the Empyrean Fairy was her disciple, Nuwa would not let her go. "Yi Xian, do you know? I don't know when it started, but my heart has been filled with you. You are my husband, the Empyrean Fairy. If you die, why should I live alone?" The Empyrean Fairy smiled miserably. Her smile was filled with indescribable emotions, which made Yi Xian's eyes glaze over. His heart trembled to the extreme. Is it really worth it? Yi Xian's eyes were in a daze. His heart was trembling. Scenes of him getting to know the Empyrean Fairy flashed through his mind as he mumbled to himself. "It is." The Empyrean Fairy was still smiling, but tears were flowing down her cheeks. Yi Xian was speechless as he stared at the tears on the Empyrean Fairy's cheeks. He never thought that he would have any feelings for the Empyrean Fairy. Back then, he only married her to solidify his position as the Celestial Emperor. He only treated her as a toy. Yi Xian really didn't know when the Empyrean Fairy had developed such feelings for him. Today, she actually stood in front of him when Nuwa was about to attack him. "Evil creature," Nuwa coldly rebuked, her eyes brimming with killing intent. Even though the Empyrean Fairy was her disciple, if she dared to stop her from killing Yi Xian today, she would mercilessly strike back. She would not show the slightest regard for their relationship as master and disciple. "Martial Ant, run." Suddenly, a voice filled with despair rang out. Something that no one had expected happened. Rumble, the mountain and river painting, Nuwa's spirit treasure, suddenly pressed down on Nuwa's head. Extremely dense origin immortal light erupted as it attempted to suppress Nuwa. The attacker was none other than Shuefunga, who had always been by Nuwa's side. She was also Lu Bai's disciple, Xueji, and a hidden chess piece that Yi Xian had placed by Nuwa's side. Xueji's clothes were as white as snow, as if she was dressed like Lu Bai in the past. At this moment, she was smiling, but there was a deep sense of parting and bitterness in her eyes. Her body was swaying as she poured all of her cultivation into the mountain and river map. She only wanted to fight for Yi Xian's last chance at survival. "Don't!" Yi Xian was jolted awake. His eyes were bloodshot as he let out a heart-wrenching roar. He deeply understood that Xueji's sneak attack on Nuwa would result in a tragic end. How could he ever face Lu Bai? "Martial Ant, I'm sorry. Xueji is about to leave. This is the only thing I can do. I've already refined the mountain and river painting once more. It should be able to delay her for 10 breaths of time." Xueji's body was falling apart as blood soaked her body, but she was still weeping and urging Yi Xian to run. Rumble, the map of mountains and rivers of the gods of earth and Vale was glowing. It was a primordial spiritual treasure, and one of the most precious treasures in Goddess Nviwa's possession. She had given it to Xueji. However, Goddess Nviwa had never thought that her disciple, whom she had carefully cultivated, would betray her at this critical moment and bring her great trouble. Traitor! Nuwa was finally enraged. She had never been so furious before. First, it was the Empyrean Fairy's betrayal. Now, even Shuefunga had betrayed her. This had utterly humiliated her and made her, a dignified saint, into a laughingstock. Rumble, the mountain and river painting was pressing down. 3 breaths of time had passed, and Yi Xian was only left with 7 breaths of time. By the time Nuwa reacted, Yi Xian would definitely not be able to escape. Run! Yi Xian was a decisive person, and definitely not an indecisive one. He deeply understood that everything Xueji had done would be in vain if he didn't escape. Rumble! Yi Xian forcibly raised his cultivation and was about to turn into a beam of light and escape. But before he could escape, a dozen figures suddenly surrounded him. They were Duo Bao Rulai, Emperor of Fengdu, and the others. "You want to escape? Do you think you can?" Emperor of Fengdu's murderous intent completely blocked Yi Xian's escape route. "Celestial Emperor, run!" Rumble. The few remaining members of the celestial court madly attacked Emperor of Fengdu and the others. The three sage-to-be were seriously injured, but they also threw a palm strike at Emperor of Fengdu, hoping to open up a way for Yi Xian to escape. Bang! There was a sky-high explosion, and the void was destroyed. The mountain and river painting above Nua's head suddenly exploded. It didn't even wait for 10 breaths of time. It was also at this moment that the sacred light of heaven and earth sealed the sky and earth. Yi Xian's last hope of escape was also completely cut off. Traitor, you deserve to die. Everyone below the Saint Realm was an ant. Xueji had underestimated Nua's Saint Realm cultivation. She only managed to delay for 5 breaths of time, and was greeted by a sacred light of heaven and earth. Bang! No! The sky exploded and her body exploded. Under Yi Xian's shrill roar, Xueji was annihilated by the sacred light of heaven and earth. Her flesh and blood were quickly annihilated, but she still smiled at Yi Xian before she died. Xueji. Yi Xian had completely lost his mind. When he saw Xueji die tragically at the hands of Nua, an unimaginable demonic light violently bloomed around him. The boundless blood chi of heaven and earth filled the air. Nua, I'm going to tear you to pieces. Yi Xian didn't know where he got the strength from, but he suddenly threw a punch at Nua. The demonic light that exploded the sky was terrifying and dazzling, but this attack had no effect on Nua. Bang! A sacred light annihilated Yi Xian's fist radiance and knocked him to the ground again. It was also at this moment that the chaotic heavenly sword appeared in the void and quietly fell above Yi Xian. It was releasing a mighty power that could suppress and destroy the spirit. No one can stop you. Today, this saint wants your soul to disperse and die. Nua's aura was cold and emotionless. She was truly enraged. She walked slowly towards Yi Xian, because she wanted to kill Yi Xian with her own hands with the chaotic heavenly sword. Rumble. Everything in the chaotic world was distorted. When Nua held the sword in her hand, the sacred light of heaven and earth illuminated the 3 realms. Even the great stars in the luminous starry sky stopped rotating. Die! Boom! Nua finally slashed her sword at Yi Xian. This sword could destroy heaven and earth. This sword could sweep through the starry sky. This sword could bury all things. No one could survive this sword. Enough! Suddenly, the universe was filled with murderous cries from all directions. The laws of heaven and earth exploded. The clouds in 100 million miles were destroyed. A speck of green light fell from the sky and blasted the chaotic heavenly sword out of Nua's hand. It also sent Nua flying back tens of thousands of miles. Her expression changed drastically as she looked at the sky in horror. Chapter 780. Heaven and earth froze as killing intent soared into the sky. The universe was in turmoil, and the 3 realms were trembling slightly. It was as if an ancient ferocious god was awakening in the depths of the luminous sun-starry sky, looking down at the 3 realms with eyes that could destroy all life. What had happened? The 8 forces and the quasi-saints were all trembling, because they saw Nua slashing at Yi Xian with her sword, but she was blasted back tens of thousands of miles by a beam of azure light from beyond the heavens. Terrifying, too terrifying. It was so terrifying that even their souls were trembling. Who was Nua? She was one of the 6 great saints of the world. To be able to force a saint back, the other party's background was simply unimaginably terrifying. Senior brother. Suddenly, Nua's aura turned cold. She looked up into the sky, and her voice was extremely cold. Clearly, she knew who had saved Yi Xian's life. Rumble. A figure Tongtian was standing on the ground. The beam of killing saint light bloomed brightly in the luminous sun, and the great stars were vanishing one after another. It was as if everything in the world was trembling because of this person's appearance. Tongtian. Suddenly, an extremely horrifying scream was heard. The immortal Wang of the South Pole's face was pale, and his entire body went limp on the ground. This also proved the extent of his fear. Thump, thump, thump. Dressed in azure robes, the killing intent was biting cold, and the majestic bearing of a man who looked down on all eternity. Tongtian walked over from beyond the heavens, and with every step he took, the stars vanished with a bang. His power was simply unimaginably terrifying. Boom! The killing saint light covered the heavens and the earth, and a vision of azure lotuses appeared in the sky. Tong Tian finally stood in the firmament, but he was expressionless as he looked calmly at Niwa. Senior brother, are you going to save him? Niwa asked coldly. The saint light around her was in disorder, proving that her heart was in turmoil. Jia School was born because of him, and exists because of him. Junior sister, you can't kill him, Tong Tian said calmly. Looking at Tong Tian's indifferent expression, Niwa frowned, her eyes showing an extremely serious expression. She had never thought that Tong Tian would actually make a move and save Yi Xian at the most critical moment. This made her feel extremely troubled. Who was Tong Tian? Not only was he a sage, but he was also one of the 3 pure ones. He also had the fairy-slaying sword formation, and the ultimate formation of heaven and earth. In the past, he had relied on his own strength to fight against 4 sages. Although the formation was broken, and he lost in the end, just this battle alone had established Tong Tian's supreme reputation. He had single-handedly fought against 4 sages, and even the strongest sage Lao Tzu. Although the fairy-slaying sword formation played a large part in this battle, it also proved how terrifying Tong Tian was. Today, if Tong Tian insisted on saving Yi Xian, she, Niwa, would not be able to stop him. She was even less likely to be a match for Tong Tian. She was very clear about this matter. Senior brother is wise. Yi Xian insulted a sage and caused a great disaster, causing a calamity to the world. He deserved to die. Niwa frowned, hoping to persuade Tong Tian to leave. Junior sister, senior brother knows what you're thinking. However, don't blame senior brother for not caring about our relationship today. You won't be able to kill Yi Xian. The Grand Master of Heaven said in a low voice. You? Niwa's expression froze. Then it instantly turned gloomy. She never thought that Tong Tian would actually not give her any face because of a mere Yi Xian. Tong Tian, don't tell me you're going to fall out with me and become enemies with me because of an ant like him? Niwa said coldly. As a sage, if she could not kill Yi Xian today, wouldn't she become the laughingstock of the 3 realms? Fall out with me and become enemies. Ha ha, ha. Tong Tian laughed maniacally. His laughter shook the world, as if he had heard the funniest joke in the world. Suddenly Tong Tian's laughter stopped. He looked coldly at Niwa. Tong Tian's earth-shaking killing sacred light rolled through the 3 realms. His voice that looked down on all living beings also sounded. Niwa, although you and I are both sages, do you think you're qualified to become enemies with me? Or have you forgotten what kind of person I am after all this time? Huh. When Tong Tian's oppressive voice rang out, the killing sacred light in the world crisscrossed. It was as if the 3 realms were about to collapse. Hiss. Gasps could be heard from all directions. When Tong Tian revealed his powerful and terrifying side, all living beings fell limp to the ground. They looked at Tong Tian with eyes full of fear. Tong Tian, don't go too far. As a sage, Niwa naturally could not admit defeat. She loudly reprimanded Tong Tian. However, her eyes were extremely serious. Clearly, Tong Tian's battle prowess was too terrifying. Niwa alone was definitely not a match for Tong Tian. However, if she did not kill Yi Xian today, Yi Xian would definitely become a huge problem for her. This was definitely not an outcome she wanted to see. Tong Tian, do you want to start a war with me? Niwa reprimanded. The sacred light of heaven and earth whistled out, and the heavenly Tao's laws descended. It was as if she was about to attack Tong Tian in the next moment. Niwa, since you're also Master Hongjuan's disciple, I don't want to make things difficult for you. As long as you retreat today and don't make things difficult for Yi Xian in the future, I'll owe you a favor, Tong Tian said coldly. It seemed like he was advising Niwa, but in fact it was also a threat. Impossible. Niwa did not hesitate at all, and directly reprimanded Tong Tian. This was not only related to her dignity as a sage, but also the karma between her and Yi Xian. Tong Tian, don't forget, although you're one of the 3 pure ones, you offended the 4 great sages during the great God investiture tribulation. If you put me on the opposite side today, I'm afraid your Jia school will not have a good ending, Niwa directly said. She was also telling Tong Tian the consequences of doing so. Obviously, Tong Tian had fought the 4 great sages alone during the great God investiture tribulation in the past. This had already formed a huge grudge. If he offended Niwa today, Tong Tian could really be said to be isolated and helpless among the sages. Rumble. Tong Tian moved the ground. The sun and moon lost their light. 4 green rays suddenly fell from the sky. 4 murderous swords floated in the sky. The immortal slaying swords poured down in torrents, causing the world to be in chaos and illuminating Tong Tian's divine might. Buzz! The 4 immortal slaying swords rotated endlessly. The world's space-time was slightly distorted. The wisps of immortal slaying swords' light were soul-stirring. Tong Tian also looked at Yi Xian at this time. A bright smile appeared on his face. Yi Xian. Yi Xian greets the sect master. Yi Xian was seriously injured and on the verge of death. His whole body was filled with the aura of death. However, he was still hanging on by a breath because he did not want to die. If he did not destroy Niwa's soul, how could he be willing to die? Chapter 781. Yi Xian, you were right back then. When have I, Tong Tian, ever compromised? If I, Tong Tian, choose to compromise, would I still be the Tong Tian who controls the 4 immortal slaying swords? Tong Tian smiled. His smile only bloomed for Yi Xian, because it was Yi Xian who made him understand himself. Ever since the great god investiture tribulation, his will had been depressed. He had been silent in the Aquamarine Palace for countless years, and had even given up on Yi Xian in order to protect the Jie school. However, Tong Tian would never forget what Yi Xian said to him when he left the Aquamarine Palace. When had Tong Tian ever been afraid of someone who dared to face the 4 great sages alone? When had he ever compromised? After countless years had passed, his hostility seemed to be on the verge of being ground away. His temperament, which had once looked down on the past and present, was even more silent. Until Yi Xian left the roaming Jade Palace. The Grand Master of Heaven had been pondering over this question. When the 2 celestial courts started fighting, Tong Tian sat cross-legged in the Aquamarine Palace. He personally witnessed Yi Xian's will to go against the current. Even when faced with Niwa's merciless suppression, Yi Xian did not have the slightest fear. Yi Xian was not a saint, but he was fearless in the face of a saint. He even shouted the words, "If you don't advance, you will fall behind." Tong Tian finally woke up from his stupor. He also finally regained his fearless fighting spirit. It was also at this moment that he finally walked out of the Aquamarine Palace and saved Yi Xian from Niwa's hands. Sect Master, I'm not the 7th heaven-ordained saint. Have you really thought it through? Although Yi Xian was seriously injured and dying, his mind was very clear. This was because he was not the 7th heaven-ordained saint. If Tong Tian fought with Niwa to save his life today, it would not benefit Tong Tian at all. Haha. Tong Tian laughed wildly and said, Yi Xian, what 7th heaven-ordaining saint? I, Tong Tian, may have cared about these things before, but today I, Tong Tian, don't care about these things. Since you, Yi Xian, have helped my Jie school and have a good relationship with me, I can't be at ease if I don't protect your life. Thank you, Sect Master. I, Yi Xian, will remember your kindness today. I will definitely repay you double in the future. Yi Xian cupped his hands and bowed. His voice was extremely weak, but it was powerful and resonant. Senior brother, you're too rash. Niwa suddenly scolded. She looked at Yi Xian with murderous intent. Not only did she hate Yi Xian, but she also wanted to kill Yi Xian. I'll give you 3 breaths of time. If you don't retreat, don't blame me for disregarding our relationship as senior brother and junior sister. Tong Tian roared coldly. Tong Tian, do you really think I'm afraid of you? As a saint, if Niwa were to retreat, she would definitely be ridiculed by the people of the 3 realms. Moreover, as a saint, Tong Tian could not kill her. Celestial end. Rumble. His sword pointed to the sky, and with a loud boom, the 4 immortal extermination swords rotated in the universe. The celestial end sword suddenly lit up, and its killing holy light filled the air. It turned into billions of miles of green light that slashed towards Niwa. He attacked without any hesitation. This was Tong Tian, who had found his true self. Even if the 5 great saints were to become his enemies, he had no fear. The 4 immortal extermination swords were the #1 killing weapon of the heavenly Tao. The celestial end sword was only one of them. In the past, it was used by Shen Gongbao as Yi Xian's Dao protector treasure. However, it did not display any particularly terrifying power. It was not that the celestial end sword was weak, but it depended on who had it. At this moment, Tong Tian was using the celestial end sword, and the terrifying power it created was simply terrifying. Go! Facing Tong Tian's sudden attack, the killing green light filled the celestial end sword. Niua's expression instantly turned serious. She suddenly threw out the innate spiritual treasure, the red embroidered ball, and it went straight for the celestial end sword. Rumble! The battle between saints was destructive. When the celestial end sword and the red embroidered ball collided, the boundless world quickly collapsed. The holy light that annihilated the three realms shot out in all directions, and all living things were about to be buried under the might of the saints. Clang! The red embroidered ball's holy light trembled, and the celestial end sword hummed. After a loud explosion, the red embroidered ball was blasted away by the celestial end sword, and Niua's figure retreated 1,000,000 miles, barely avoiding the celestial end sword light. Terrifying, too terrifying. Tong Tian only used the celestial end sword to force Niua to retreat. When this scene fell into the eyes of everyone looked at Tong Tian with great awe. The old legend. There were 6 saints in the world, except for Hong Jun, who represented the heavenly Tao with his body. The strongest among the 6 saints was Lao Tzu, the head of the 3 pure ones. Except for Dao Tianzuan and Lao Tzu, Tong Tian was the strongest among the other 5 saints. Yuanshi Tianzuan and Tong Tian's cultivation were on par, but Tong Tian had the fairy-slaying sword formation, so he was ranked behind Tong Tian. Behind Yuanshi Tianzuan were the 2 saints of the West, and Niua was the weakest among the 6 saints. Of course, the so-called strength was just a general statement. Saints were immortal, and existed as long as the world. A saint could not kill a saint. This was an unchanging iron law. But today, the prime of Tong Tian had shown his cultivation that could overlook the past and present, and Goddess Nviwa was at a disadvantage. This also proved that the rumors were true. Goddess Nviwa was indeed the weakest among the 6 great sages. Tong Tian, you've gone too far. Niua's hands formed a seal, and the holy light of heaven and earth covered the sky and earth. She condensed the heavenly Tao law, and displayed the saint's technique. She was really angry and attacked Tong Tian. Immortal trapping! Tong Tian's sword was like the sky, stirring up heaven and earth, and tearing the universe apart. The immortal trapping sword released a green light, and turned into a 90,000-mile Milky Way waterfall, and attacked Niua. Clang, clang, clang. The 2 sages engaged in a fierce battle. For a moment, the heavens and earth darkened. The broken sky spread out in all directions. The stars in the luminous starry sky kept falling, and the vast sea of stars whizzed down, bringing an unimaginable calamity to the entire earth immortal realm. Kill Yi Xian for this saint. Suddenly, in the universe, Niua was retreating because she was facing Tong Tian. She was no match for him at all. But Niua also knew that she was no match for Tong Tian. Her real purpose today was to kill Yi Xian, and this made her rebuke all the forces. Let's see who dares. Tong Tian swung his sword, and the immortal slaying sword fell on Yi Xian's head. The killing holy light protected Yi Xian, and this made all the forces shudder. Who would dare to have the slightest disloyalty? Tong Tian, this saint and you are irreconcilable. Niua shouted angrily, and her attacks were even more ruthless. Unfortunately, she couldn't force Tong Tian to retreat, and she was constantly at a disadvantage. Senior brother Yuanshi, what are you waiting for? Suddenly, Niua raised the holy light of heaven and earth, and retreated 30,000 miles. She looked up at the sky, and her face turned extremely red. Chapter 782. Junior sister is being humiliated. How can I just sit by and watch? A green lotus quietly bloomed in the sky. A middle-aged Taoist in green robes was standing on top of the green lotus. He had a warm smile on his face as he nodded at Niua. Greetings, Yuanshi Tianzuan. Greetings, master. The immortal hermit of the South Pole was overjoyed. He led the immortals of the Chan sect to kneel on the ground, and loudly called out Yuanshi Tianzuan's Taoist name. Everyone and the quasi-saints bowed to Yuanshi, their eyes filled with awe. If Tongtian's control of the immortal slaying four swords was unparalleled, then Yuanshi Tianzuan's understanding of the Tao could be said to be at the pinnacle. Many of the Taoist techniques were created by him. His reputation in the three realms surpassed Tongtian's. Yuanshi Tianzuan, one of the three pure ones, was one of the 6 great saints of the world. When he appeared between heaven and earth, strands of Taoist light surrounded him. Mysterious chanting sounds came from the heavens. It was as if he was the incarnation of the Tao, giving people the feeling that all laws were natural. Fellow Taoists, please rise. Yuanshi Tianzuan smiled. He didn't put on the airs of a saint at all. Instead, he gave people the feeling of a spring breeze. At this moment, Tongtian's 4 swords circled around him. He frowned at Yuanshi Tianzuan. Yuanshi Tianzuan wasn't just his senior brother, but also his fated enemy. During the war between the Chan sect and the Jie sect, many of his disciples died at the hands of the Chan sect. Even though most of the disciples who didn't die were listed on the investiture of the gods, it almost caused the Jie sect to perish in the great divine investiture tribulation. Just this karma alone was enough to make the 2 of them fight to the death. Now that Yuanshi Tianzuan had arrived, Tongtian was not afraid. After all, he had the fairy-slaying sword formation in his hands. However, if the 2 sages joined forces to fight him, it would give him a lot of pressure. The fairy-slaying sword formation was indeed extremely powerful, and it had even fought against the 4 great sages in the past. However, this did not mean that his cultivation was stronger than Yuanshi's. Their cultivations were about the same. If the 2 great sages joined forces to fight, it would be extremely difficult for him to protect Yi Xian. After all, Yuanshi alone was a huge problem. Moreover, there was also Niwa, who was bent on killing Yi Xian. Yi Xian, I will hold the 2 of them back. If you have the chance, escape to the lower realm. Tongtian's 4 swords circled around his body, as he secretly transmitted his voice to Yi Xian. At this moment, Yi Xian's flesh was badly mutilated, and his limbs were badly damaged. His body was surrounded by wisps of death aura. Even the indestructible true spirit in his sea of consciousness had already cracked. He was already in a state of near death. However, Yi Xian stared fixedly at Niwa and Yuanshi Tianzuan, as if he wanted to deeply imprint their appearances in his mind. When his eyes opened and closed, a cold murderous intent flashed in them. Yi Xian wished he could kill Niwa and Yuanshi Tianzuan. However, he hated himself more. He hated his own incompetence. He hated that he did not have the cultivation of a sage. At this moment, he could only be a lamb waiting to be slaughtered, being humiliated and despised by the 2 great sages. If it were not for Tongtian, he would definitely die today. I know the way. Yi Xian paused between each word, as he secretly responded to Tongtian. The hatred in his eyes gradually faded, and he quickly calmed himself down. Yi Xian was not a reckless man. On the contrary, he was a very smart person. Today 2 great sages appeared. Even though he had Tongtian's protection, it was still extremely dangerous. If he made a mistake and allowed the 2 great sages to find an opportunity, it would only take a single blow to take his life. No one wanted to die. Even Yi Xian was no exception. He did not want to be sullenly killed by the sages. He wanted to live. He wanted to cross the 3 tribulations of the heavenly Tao alive, until he was comparable to the sages. In the future, he would definitely settle today's karma. Kill the sages. These 2 simple words explained Yi Xian's intentions. However, he was currently too weak in front of the sages. He was so weak that he did not even enter the sage's eyes. Therefore, he had to escape. He could not die here. Only then could he avenge today's humiliation in the future. Greetings, senior brother Yuanshi. Niwa bowed respectfully. The murderous aura on her face was dissipating. Clearly, Yuanshi Tianzuan's appearance had given her great confidence. Today, Yi Xian would undoubtedly die. Junior sister, there's no need to be so courteous. Yuanshi Tianzuan smiled slightly, then turned to look at Tongtian. The smile on his face was also gradually fading. Junior brother Tongtian, for the sake of a mere Yi Xian, you actually disregarded our relationship as fellow disciples. You even wantonly attacked junior sister Niwa. Aren't you afraid that the beings of the 3 realms will laugh at you? Yuanshi Tianzuan coldly rebuked. The 12th rank blue lotus swayed beneath his feet, and strands of chaotic light beams spilled out. Yuanshi, don't talk nonsense with me. Since you dare to appear here, I might as well test your cultivation. Let's see how much you've grown after countless years. Tong Tian could not be bothered to feign civility with Yuanshi Tianzuan. The 4 immortal slaying swords rumbled and floated in the void in all directions. They even released a terrifying killing holy light. Junior brother Tong Tian, you're still as arrogant as before. Could it be that you've forgotten how you defeated the Aquamarine Palace back then? Yuanshi Tianzuan coldly said. Yuanshi, you bastard, how dare you humiliate me? At the mention of the investiture of the gods' war, Tong Tian flew into a rage. That was the greatest pain in his heart. Not only were his disciples killed or injured, but the entire Jie school was almost destroyed. He was also defeated by the 4 great sages and left in desolation. That was his greatest humiliation. Junior brother, you're overthinking. I'm just stating a fact. I hope you won't repeat the mistakes of the past, Yuanshi Tianzuan coldly replied. Then, he looked indifferently at Yi Xian. Yi Xian, you've confused the 3 realms and killed the innocent. Today you even dared to humiliate junior sister Nuwa. Why don't you quickly end your own life here? Are you waiting for me to personally take action? The thunderous voice of the heavenly Tao was deafening. Yuanshi Tianzuan directly attacked Yi Xian. Yuanshi, if I don't die today, I'll settle the karma of today with you, and that bitch Nuwa sooner or later, Yi Xian said coldly. He was not afraid even when facing one of the 3 pure ones, Yuanshi Tianzuan. Evil creature. Yuanshi Tianzuan flew into a rage. A dot of Tao light appeared on his fingertip and disturbed the laws of heaven and earth. He pointed it at Yi Xian. Rumble. The great Tao was boundless and the laws of heaven and earth fell. This was the derivation of the Tao and the power to destroy the soul. If Yuanshi Tianzuan's attack really landed on Yi Xian would definitely die. Be careful, Celestial Emperor. The members of the Celestial Court shouted in horror. However, Yi Xian did not speak or move. He ignored Yuanshi Tianzuan's attack, because he knew very well that even if he dodged, he would not be able to avoid it. Moreover, Yi Xian also believed that he would not die. You can't kill him. As expected, before Yuanshi Tianzuan's attack landed, Tong Tian slashed out with a beam of killing divine light and neutralized Yuanshi Tianzuan's attack. Junior brother, are you forcing me to fight you? Yuanshi Tianzuan turned to look at Tong Tian. His body was surrounded by divine light, and the rumbling of the heavenly Tao came from the void. Chapter 783. Cut the crap. Let's fight. Tong Tian bellowed angrily. You have no respect for your elders. If I don't teach you a lesson today, the living beings of the 3 realms will really think that I, Yuanshi, am inferior to you, Tong Tian. Yuanshi Tianzuan's expression was cold as he struck out with the saint's technique. The Tao light of the Milky Way filled the 3 realms and descended upon Tong Tian. Kill! The immortal slaying sword glowed. This was the sacred light of eternal slaughter. It directly shattered Yuanshi Tianzuan's saint's technique. The immortal slaying 4 swords emitted a clanging sound of slaughter as they charged towards Yuanshi Tianzuan. Junior sister, I'll stop this disrespectful junior brother. You quickly kill that evil creature Yi Xian. Clang! 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 Yuanshi Tianzuan waved his sleeve. Terrifying sacred light emanated and blasted away the immortal slaying 4 swords. All sorts of unimaginable saints' techniques were blasted out, shattering the firmament for hundreds of millions of miles. At this moment he was fighting with Tong Tian. Who dares to kill someone that I, Tong Tian, want to protect? Tong Tian was too fierce. His sword fingers were like the sky as he pointed at Nuwa. The immortal slaying sword transformed into a green light 90,000 miles long as it blasted towards Nuwa. Clearly, he wouldn't give Nuwa the slightest chance. Tong Tian, this saint and you are irreconcilable. Nuwa was blocked by Tong Tian. She coldly rebuked him. The red embroidered ball in her hand smashed through the firmament and brought along a sacred light that blotted out the sky as it charged towards Tong Tian. Rumble! For a moment the world darkened. The firmament was shattering, the stars were falling, and the boundless earth caved in millions of feet. The 3 saints were completely locked in battle. Yi Xian, let's go. The 4 celestial slaying swords were capable of slaughtering everything in the world. They were also Tongtian's strongest spiritual treasures. At this moment, he was fighting against the 2 sages. He let out a roar that could shatter the world, hoping that Yi Xian could take the opportunity to escape to the lower realm. Pass down this saint's decree. Whoever kills Yi Xian, this saint will bestow upon him a pre-celestial spirit treasure, and even become this saint's last disciple. The heavenly sovereign of primordial beginning shouted loudly, "Whoever kills Yi Xian, I will bestow upon him 3,000 scrolls. I will also owe him a favor." Niwa continued to attack the Tongtian with her saint techniques. At the same time, she also made a great promise to the 8 forces and the presages. Following the 2 saints' promises, an uproar broke out. Everyone's eyes turned red, and they looked at Yi Xian with a crazed expression. Everyone in the world came and went for benefits. As long as they killed Yi Xian, not only would Niwa owe them a favor, they could also become Yuanshi Tianzuan's disciple. This was an opportunity that had never been seen before. At this moment, the great golden immortals of the 8 powers, regardless of whether they were immortals or greater demons, were all looking at Yi Xian with bloodshot eyes. They even faintly surrounded Yi Xian, as if they were about to attack him in the next moment. However, the presages were not tempted by the promises made by the 2 saints. As presages, they knew very well that other than the opportunity to become a saint, nothing else was useful to them. Moreover, this matter wasn't something that they could participate in. If the various quasi-saints were to attack Yi Xian, they would completely offend the Grand Master of Heaven. If the Grand Master of Heaven were to settle this matter in the future, this wasn't the result that the various quasi-saints wanted. Dong Huangtai and Di Jun were silent. Although Yi Xian was their enemy, they also had their own pride. They had been completely defeated. If they went to kill Yi Xian now, their pride would not allow them to do so. Needless to say, the dozens of presages of the ancient demon court did not attack Yi Xian, since the 2 demon emperors did not attack. Moreover, even if they wanted to kill Yi Xian, they had been severely injured by the cosmic stars formation. They had no spare energy to kill Yi Xian. Taoist Landia and Zhen Yuanzi watched silently. It was impossible for them to attack Yi Xian. As for the Emperor of Fengdu, although he wanted Yi Xian to die, he could not afford to offend the Tongtian. He could only stay out of the matter and stare at Yi Xian gloomily. The quasi-sage had the scheming of a quasi-sage, but the great golden immortals of the various powers were different. For the sake of the promise made by the 2 saints, they were currently looking at Yi Xian with killing intent. Go to hell. Finally, a Daoyuo Jingxian attacked Yi Xian. This seemed to have a chain effect. Instantly the world rumbled. Countless Daoyuo Jingxian attacked Yi Xian. They even let out ferocious murderous voices. "Don't be afraid, Celestial Emperor. We're coming." At this critical moment, the roars of the demons resounded throughout the heavens and the earth. Over 1,000 grand immortal demon monarchs arrived with a rumble. They were actually the demon monarchs that had left the heavenly court in the past. "Yi Tiandi, the old minister, is ashamed. Even if I die today, I will protect your life." Shen Gongbao shouted again and again. He led the immortals of the Jie school to block in front of Yi Xian. He also made the immortals of the Jie school display all kinds of great techniques, and crazily charged towards the incoming golden immortals. Kill! The world was in chaos. The 3 saints fought from the vault of heaven to the outer heavens, and even from the outer heavens to the vault of heaven. Billions of miles of galaxies were collapsing and countless stars were exploding. Below the 3 saints, thousands of Daoyuo Jingxian were bathed in blood. The earth-shattering battle cries could shatter one's soul. "Run, husband." In this chaotic battle, the Empyrean fairy kept shaking Yi Xian's arm, hoping that Yi Xian could take the opportunity to escape to the lower realms. At this moment, Yi Xian stared at the people who were fighting for him. He saw Shen Gongbao's chest being pierced by an immortal sword. He also saw the Daoyuo Demon King, who had left in the past fighting with the Buddhas of the West. There was also the Tongtian, who was fighting 2 saints alone. He was roaring at the heavens. His eyes were bloodshot. Cluck, cluck, cluck. Yi Xian clenched his teeth, as if they were about to break. His eyes were blood-red and ferocious. Blue veins bulged on his forehead, as if he wanted to remember this scene in the depths of his mind. With the chaos as my witness, heaven and earth as my witness, I, Yi Xian, swear to the heavens that if I don't die today, I will settle this monstrous hatred in the future. If I violate this oath, my soul will be destroyed, and I will never be reincarnated. Yi Xian roared to the sky. The bloody oath echoed between heaven and earth, causing blood-red lightning to appear in billions of miles of heaven and earth. There were loud explosions in all directions, as if they were witnessing Yi Xian's oath. Time seemed to stop, space seemed to be frozen, heaven and earth seemed to be stagnant, and all things were wailing. When Yi Xian's blood oath echoed between heaven and earth, an extremely palpitating feeling grew in the hearts of all forces, causing their expressions to change and extreme fear to appear in their eyes. Run! It was a simple word, but it brought great humiliation to Yi Xian. He suddenly turned around and fled toward the Earth Immortal world. This was because Yi Xian knew that as long as he left this place alive, this world-shaking battle would disappear. When he passed the 3 tribulations of the heavenly Tao in the future, all the grievances today would be repaid in the future. Chapter 784. Donghuang Tai, stop him. Niwa shouted angrily in the sky. At this moment, only Donghuang Tai and Emperor Jun could stop Yi Xian. However, the 2 demonic emperors were hesitant, not knowing whether they should stop Yi Xian or not. Puff! Suddenly, Donghuang Tai spat out a mouthful of essence blood and fainted on the ground. What was even more strange was that Emperor Jun's body was covered in cracks, and a large amount of blood gushed out from all parts of his body. He was also unconscious at this moment. Yi Xian, although you are the enemy of the 2 of us, we brothers disdain to hit you when you're down. Quickly run away. Donghuang Tai's voice sounded in Yi Xian's ears. Brother Yi, you are the only one I admire except for my brother Donghuang. Don't die in the hands of a saint. When we fight in the future, I will definitely wash away the shame of being defeated by you today. Emperor Jun said coldly with a sound transmission. Obviously, the 2 demonic emperors were pretending to faint. After all, they were seriously injured before. At this moment, they were pretending to be unconscious in front of Niwa. As the saint's will was irreversible, they could not directly go against it. Therefore, they had to resort to this. Donghuang Emperor Jun? Yi Xian was stunned. He took a deep look at the 2 demonic emperors, and a complicated look appeared in his eyes. Then, he activated what little cultivation he had left, and was about to escape to the mortal world. You want to leave? Rumble! Heaven and earth exploded, and Tao light covered the sky. The 3 pure ones were indeed the 3 pure ones. Yuanshi Tianzuan was too terrifying. He had been watching Yi Xian's every move. When he saw Yi Xian was about to escape to the mortal world, he took the opportunity to attack Yi Xian with a saint's grand skill. How dare you? Tong Tian shouted coldly, and his eyes were filled with anxiety. He did not expect Yuanshi Tianzuan to ignore his own safety and kill Yi Xian, even if he had to take his attack. Qi! A ray of Tao light pierced through the sky and descended towards Yi Xian. However, the Tong Tian was unable to save Yi Xian at this moment. Yi Xian was about to be killed on the spot. Am I going to die? Yi Xian was locked in place by the saint's great art. At this moment he couldn't even move a finger. He could only watch as the saint's great art descended upon him. His eyes were filled with unwillingness and despair. Suddenly, a strand of darkness silently arose at this critical moment. An obscure fluctuation caused the heavens and the earth to freeze, and it silently obstructed Yi Xian's path. Wang! The void was destroyed without a single ripple. The great technique of the heavenly sovereign of primordial beginning strangely dissipated. It was also at this moment that Yi Xian's body could finally move. However, he was completely stunned on the spot. How dare you? Who are you? Yuanshi Tianzuan's expression changed drastically. An extremely terrifying sacred light of the heavens and the earth spread out. A pair of Dharma eyes of heaven and earth illuminated the 3 realms. He wanted to find the person who had saved Yi Xian's life. Just a little bit, just a little bit. If this strange black light had not blocked the attack for Yi Xian, Yi Xian would have already died at the hands of Yuanshi Tianzuan. However, Yuanshi Tianzuan's heart was extremely heavy. This was because he deeply understood that he was one of the three pure ones. Apart from saints, no one could block his attack. However, he had never seen the power that blocked the attack for Yi Xian. It was definitely not from the other 5 saints. This was because this aura was extremely mysterious. It did not exist in the 3 realms at all. At this moment, let alone Yuanshi Tianzuan, even Niwa and Tongtian were shocked. The 2 of them were saints, so they were sensitive to auras. The aura that had flashed by earlier was strange and unfathomable. So how could the 2 of them not have sensed it? How is this possible? Niwa murmured in surprise. Her heart was extremely heavy. Was there really someone in the 3 realms who could rival saints? When she thought of this, Niwa no longer remained composed. She suddenly looked at Yi Xian, as she had thought of something extremely terrifying. Don't tell me it's him? Niwa cried out in shock. Even her eyes became extremely frozen, as she had never forgotten a figure that seemed to defy the flow of time back in Niwa Palace. It was also because of this person's appearance that Yi Xian had survived from the myriad poison ancestor. The world froze, and everything fell silent. Yi Xian seemed to have turned into a statue. Right now he did not speak or move at all. He even seemed to have forgotten about fleeing to the lower world. However, from his clenched fists and trembling body, it was possible to tell just how turbulent his mind was right now. The undying immortal scripture, the undying immortal scripture. It's him. It must be him. The exact same aura. The exact same techniques. Yuan Ling, get out here. Suddenly, Yi Xian's sluggish expression quickly dissipated. He looked around him and roared. His blood-red eyes were even more mournful and malevolent, as if he wanted to find the location of his origin spirit. After spending 4 years together on the battlefield of the Blood Sea, Yi Xian was far too familiar with Yuan Ling's aura. He was so familiar with it that he had not forgotten it even after over 100,000 years. It was like something that had been carved into his bones. Yi Xian told himself that his senses were not wrong. The black light that had just blocked Yuanshi Tianzuan's fatal attack was Yuan Ling's. The only difference was that Yuan Ling only had the cultivation of a primordial unity Xian, immortal, on the battlefield of the Blood Sea. However, the aura that flashed by just now was thousands of times stronger than the aura that Yuan Ling had released back then. Although the power had changed, the aura was exactly the same. Yi Xian was absolutely sure that his senses were not wrong. The person who had saved him was Yuan Ling. Yi Xian searched for Yuan Ling like a madman. Unfortunately, he could not find any trace of Yuan Ling at all. At this moment, the 3 sages were all looking at Yi Xian. Although they did not know who Yuan Ling was, Yi Xian's crazed appearance clearly showed that the person who had saved him was closely related to Yi Xian. No matter who you are, Yi Xian, this evil creature, will definitely die today. Yuanshi Tianzuan shouted coldly. He did not believe that there was anyone in this world who could rival them other than the 6 sages. Evil creature, die. Yuanshi Tianzuan attacked Yi Xian again. Niwa also shot a beam of holy light at Yi Xian with a cold expression. Obviously, with 2 sages present, no one could stop their determination to kill Yi Xian. You want to kill him? Have you asked for my permission? Tongtian had already miscalculated once, and almost caused Yi Xian to die at the hands of Yuanshi Tianzuan. How could he let the same thing happen again? Rumble. The whole hall was filled with white light and killing intent. Tongtian shot out a green light formation diagram. The 3 realms shook violently, and the cries of billions of souls could be heard in the void. Buzz. The 4 immortal slaying swords. The first was immortal exterminating, the second was immortal trapping, the third was immortal slaughtering, and the 4th was immortal slaying. The heavenly Tao killing weapon was unparalleled. When the 4 immortal slaying swords released heavenly Tao killing light, an extremely terrifying aura swept through the 3 realms and resonated with the green light formation diagram in the sky. Immortal slaying sword formation. Yuanshi Tianzuan roared in shock. He stared at Tongtian with extreme horror in his eyes. Senior brother Tongtian, are you crazy? You actually used the immortal slaying sword formation to protect an ant like Yi Xian? Niwa rebuked angrily with panic in her eyes. It was not that Nuwa was afraid of the immortal slaying sword formation. Even if Tong Tian could not kill the two sages with the immortal slaying sword formation, the immortal slaying sword formation could penetrate the heaven and earth. The immortal slaying sword formation was the cause of the immortal slaying sword formation in the past, and it also drew out Dao ancestor Hongjun, who had merged with the Dao. What happened in the past was about to happen again. If Dao ancestor Hongjun came out and punished the sages, how could Nuwa bear the consequences? How could Nuwa and Yuanshi Tianzuan not be afraid? Chapter 785. The fairy slaying sword formation could destroy heaven and earth. The murderous aura of the four great swords was rampant. Once the fairy slaying sword formation was activated, even a sage would not be able to escape for a while. It had the ferocious power to destroy heaven and earth. During the investiture of the gods' war, Tong Tian relied on the fairy slaying sword formation to fight against the four sages. Although the formation was destroyed, and he left the aquamarine palace in the end, it was a glorious defeat. It also made Tong Tian's name resound between heaven and earth. Rumble. When the heavens released murderous aura, the stars changed. When the earth released murderous aura, dragons and snakes rose from the land. When the man released murderous aura, heaven and earth were turned upside down. The fairy slaying sword formation was the #1 killing weapon of the way of heaven. When the four swords were activated together, they could destroy both the past and the present. This was not just a saying. It had a terrifying power that could frighten even gods and ghosts. Nuwa and Yuanshi looked solemn. The various forces had already stopped fighting. Everyone looked at Tong Tian with horror in their eyes. It was because if the fairy slaying sword formation was really activated, no one present could escape. The only outcome was death. How could this not make them feel terrified? Junior brother, are you really going to disregard everything for this evil creature? Yuanshi Tianzuan rebuked in a cold voice. No one can kill the person that I, Tong Tian, want to protect. This simple sentence clearly stated Tong Tian's intention. The immortal slaying sword formation rumbled and rotated in the firmament. The murderous intent of the heavenly Tao that poured down was simply shocking, further proving that Tong Tian was not just saying it for fun. Junior sister, why don't we? Yuanshi Tianzuan frowned. Obviously, he had the intention to retreat. If a battle between sages really started for Yi Xian, the consequences would be unimaginable. Senior brother Yuanshi, if this boy doesn't die, he will become a great threat to us in the future. Nuwa didn't hesitate at all, and decisively rejected Yuanshi Tianzuan's proposal. The senses of a sage were too sensitive. Yi Xian had always been in a desperate situation, and had even reached the sage-to-be realm. If this continued for a long time, it was not impossible for him to become a sage. Moreover, Yi Xian had long become a knot in Nuwa's heart. If she did not kill him, how could Nuwa be at ease? Tong Tian, since you are not afraid of provoking Master Hongjun, I will fight you to the death today. Nuwa had already thrown caution to the wind. Yi Xian must die today. Even if the Tong Tian activated the immortal slaying sword array, she would not retreat in the slightest. Then I will grant you your wish. Tong Tian was indifferent and emotionless. His robe exploded, and the killing holy light of Tong Tian spread out. The immortal slaying sword array rumbled and rotated. The four great killing swords emitted sword radiance that could destroy the world. Heaven and earth stagnated and time froze. Spatial cracks appeared between heaven and earth. The rotation of the immortal slaying sword array became more and more terrifying, and gradually distorted the heaven and earth of the three realms, as if the world was about to collapse. Taoist Tong Tian, please wait a moment. Suddenly, at this critical moment, two figures strolled over from the west. The sky was filled with golden lotuses blooming in the void, and an extremely grand chanting of sutras could be heard. The holy light of heaven and earth rippled. A bamboo pole quietly lay between heaven and earth, and also stopped the immortal slaying sword array from pouring out the heavenly Tao's killing intent. The wonderful tree of seven treasures, the most sacred object of Buddhism, could wipe out all things in the world. When this object appeared between heaven and earth, Tong Tian's expression changed, while Nuwa and Yuanshi were extremely surprised. Juanti's guidance. Tong Tian enunciated each word clearly. His eyes were extremely gloomy, and his brows were tightly knitted together. The two sages of the West floated over without a trace of dust or killing intent. Although the two sages were dressed in Taoist attire, they were the founders of Western Buddhism. Yi Xian, when I activate the Immortal Slaying Sword Array to trap the four of them, you should quickly escape to the lower realm. Remember, before you become a sage, you must never reveal your true body. Tong Tian stood proudly in the sky, but he was secretly transmitting his voice to Yi Xian. This was because Tong Tian did not need to ask the two sages of the West's intentions. They were definitely on Yuhua and Yuanshi's side. Greetings, senior brothers and sisters. Zhuanti smiled and nodded, giving off a feeling of a spring breeze. The two sages of the West had listened to Dao in the Purple Cloud Palace in the past, and were accepted as nominal disciples by ancestor Hong Jun. In terms of seniority, they were naturally inferior to three Pure Ones and Yuhua. This was also the reason why they addressed the three sages as senior brothers and sisters. Junior brothers, please help me break this Immortal Slaying Sword Array. Yuhua expressed her thoughts directly without any nonsense. This was because she knew that Yi Xian had almost destroyed Spirited Mountain and had a great grudge against Western Buddhism. Senior sister, please calm down. Zhuanti put his palms together and smiled. Then he looked at Tong Tian and said, Senior brother Tong Tian, the catastrophe of heaven and earth was born because of Yi Xian. Senior brother Tong Tian, please understand right and wrong. Let the two of us return to the Bodhi tree and reflect on our mistakes until the hostility in his chest is worn out. This is a great merit and great fortune. Zhuanti, you? Hearing Zhuanti's words, Yuhua's expression changed. She did not expect that the two sages of the West had not come here to kill Yi Xian, but to take Yi Xian back to the Western paradise. The words of the sages were not false. Since Zhuanti said to reflect on his mistakes, Yi Xian's life would not be in danger. However, it was clear that the two sages of the West had other plans. It was definitely not that simple. You want to take Yi Xian away? Tong Tian's expression froze, and then instantly became gloomy. He did not believe that the two sages of the West would be so kind. There must be some conspiracy behind this. If senior brother Tong Tian does not allow it, then the two of us can only stand on senior sister Yuhua's side. Zhuanti let out a long sigh. Taking advantage of a crisis, brazenly taking advantage of a crisis. It was almost the same trick as the apatheicized war of the past. The apatheicized war of the apatheicized war of the past was a battle between the Chan school and the Jie school. But the biggest beneficiaries were the two sages of the West. If Yuanshi Tianzuan had not invited the two sages of the West to break the Immortal Slaying Sword formation together, Western Buddhism would not have been able to prosper after the apatheicized war. How similar was the scene today to that of the past? The two sages of the West were once again taking advantage of a crisis, but the only difference was that their purpose this time was to take Yi Xian away. Zhuanti, are you threatening me? Tong Tian's aura was cold and sharp, and wisps of heaven ways killing intent filled the air. Senior brother Tong Tian, don't be angry. The Taoist priest smiled and looked at Yi Xian. He nodded kindly at him and said, Little friend Yi Xian, you saw what happened today. Senior brother Tong Tian fought two fellow disciples for you, but you killed too many people. Do you really want to see senior brother Tong Tian fight to the death with us? Looking at the kind smile on Zhuanti's face, Yi Xian was expressionless. No one knew what he was thinking, but Yi Xian's lips curved into a self-mocking smile. Yi Xian was not a 3-year-old child. He understood everything in front of him. Tong Tian was indeed very strong, with the Immortal Slaying Sword formation in his hands. Even if Yuanshi Tianzuan and Yuhua joined forces, they would not be able to do anything to Tong Tian. However, with the arrival of the two sages of the West, everything had changed. If the two sages of the West joined forces with Yuanshi and Yuhua, even the Immortal Slaying Sword formation could be broken. At that time he would definitely die. Even if Tong Tian wanted to protect him, it would be useless. Chapter 786. The four sages were too terrifying. No matter how strong Tong Tian was, there was a limit to his strength. Tong Tian was only relying on the sword formation, and his cultivation was only on par with Yuanshi Tianzuan's. Yi Xian laughed. He really laughed, but it was a contemptuous laugh. He was laughing at Nuwa and Yuanshi. When the two sages of the West appeared, Yi Xian understood that everything was under their control. Even Nuwa and Yuanshi had been tricked. The two sages of the West's goal was simple. They wanted to take him away. At this critical moment, the two sages of the West were the key to Yi Xian's survival. To put it bluntly, if Yi Xian didn't agree to leave with the two sages of the West, the two sages of the West would help Nuwa and Yuanshi break the sword formation. At that time, Yi Xian would die without a doubt. If Yi Xian left with the two sages of the West, Nuwa and Yuanshi wouldn't be able to stop them. This was because there was still Tong Tian protecting Yi Xian. This would also allow the two sages of the West to form an alliance with the Tong Tian. Therefore, the two sages of the West would benefit the most. Whether Yi Xian died or left with the two sages of the West, it would be beneficial for the two sages of the West. At this moment, Yi Xian wasn't the only one who understood the crux of the matter. Nuwa and Yuanshi weren't fools either. They immediately understood the current situation. This caused their faces to darken. They looked at the two sages of the West with extreme hostility. "All right, I'm willing to go with you." Suddenly, Yi Xian spoke in a low voice. He finally agreed to the two sages of the West. "You can't." Tong Tian scolded coldly. He knew very well that if Yi Xian went with the two sages of the West, even if he didn't die, Yi Xian's fate wouldn't be any better. The two sages of the West were the most skilled at scheming. Among the 6 sages, they were the most shameless. In the past, when the Purple Cloud Palace heard about the Tao, they cried loudly. That was why they were accepted as disciples of the Hongjun Tao and received 2 sages. The great was the 2 sages of the West were shameless. To survive the Great Tribulation, Tong Tian wouldn't believe that the 2 sages of the West had of the 4 sages. Tong Tian wouldn't believe that the 2 sages of the West had of the sages of the West of the West. To the sages of the sages of the sages of the sages of the sages. I. To gods too. On I. You don't know. Tong Tian's face was gloomy and uncertain. His words came to an abrupt end. In the end, he could only sigh helplessly. Tong Tian also knew the situation in front of him. He also knew what Yi Xian was thinking. He was angry that he couldn't protect Yi Xian. The matter was very clear. If Yi Xian didn't go with the 2 sages of the West, he would definitely die today. If he went with the 2 sages of the West, he might have a chance to live. But this chance was too slim. Zhuan Ti was very cunning and had the cultivation of a sage. How could Yi Xian find a chance to live in the hands of the 2 sages of the West? Well, you go with them. But I promise you that if anyone dares to kill you, I won't hesitate to destroy the 3 realms of heaven, earth and man, Tong Tian roared coldly. He seemed to be making a promise to Yi Xian, but in fact he was warning Zhuan Ti. Zhuan Ti. Suddenly, Nuwa's breath was extremely cold, as if a cold wind was blowing. But the 2 sages of the West didn't feel anything. They just smiled at Nuwa and Yuanshi. Although Yi Xian has caused chaos in the 3 realms, the purpose of Buddhism is to help people to do good. I hope you can understand right and wrong, Zhuan Ti said with a smile. You? Nuwa said hatefully. The holy light of heaven and earth exploded in the sky. But in the end, she didn't attack the 2 sages of the West. She knew very well that Tong Tian was extremely difficult to deal with. With the 2 sages of the West, she and Yuanshi couldn't do anything. Yi Xian couldn't die here today. Well, I'll remember what happened today, Nuwa said hatefully. She took a deep look at Yi Xian, then flicked her sleeves and disappeared. Junior brothers, I hope you'll know what happened today. I'll remember what happened today. The Heavenly Lord of the Origin's expression was extremely ugly. He was one of the 3 pristines, but today, he had become the bride of the 2 sages of the West. This had already made him extremely ashamed and angry, but he could only suffer in silence and swallow this bitter fruit. Buzz! The void disappeared, the light of the way dissipated, and Yuanshi Tianzuan disappeared. But today, the 2 sages of the West had thoroughly offended the 2 sages. This was karma between sages, and they would definitely settle today's matter in the future. From this, it could be seen that the two sages of the West had paid such a high price to take Yi Xian away. There must be something hidden in this, but no one knew what the two sages of the West's purpose was. Yi Xian, if you have anything else to say it as soon as possible. From now on, you will follow us and reflect on your mistakes. When the anger in your chest dissipates, you can return to the three realms, Zhuan Ti said gently. Yi Xian, have an emperor, a worthy younger brother. The three sages to be of the celestial court, the Empyrean fairy, the troops of the celestial court, Shen Gongbao, and the other immortals of the sect of Jia, all surrounded Yi Xian at this moment. They looked at Yi Xian with heavy eyes. You don't have to worry about me. I'm just going to stay in the Western Paradise for a while. During my absence, the celestial court will disappear. If there comes a day when we meet again, the celestial court will reappear in the world, Yi Xian said with a smile. A worthy younger brother, you can't go with them. You have to know that the two sages of the West. Kong Xian's expression was heavy, as he secretly transmitted a message to Yi Xian. Because Kong Xian was once the Mahamayuri of Spirited Mountain, he knew the temperament of the two sages of the West too well. Although they were sages, they were shameless and could do anything. If Yi Xian went, they would probably never see each other again. Brother, you don't have to say much. You know that I have no choice. Yi Xian slowly shook his head. How could he not know the danger involved? It was just that he had no other choice. I'll be gone for years. There will be no time for regrets. Take care, everyone. Yi Xian took a deep look at the people of the celestial court. A bright smile appeared on his face, and he suddenly turned and walked toward the two sages of the West. Great! The two sages of the West smiled. Golden auspicious clouds rose under their feet, and the sound of Buddhist chanting could be heard in the void. Golden lotuses bloomed all over the sky, and the two sages of the West disappeared with Yi Xian. The wind swept away the clouds, and in the universe, billions of stars twinkled in the sun. The boundless sea of stars bobbed up and down. The hole in the sky could not be healed, and it caused an endless catastrophe to the Earth immortal world. However, everyone had already forgotten about this scene. In their eyes, Yi Xian's figure was lonely and bleak. It was as if this parting was forever, and they would never see each other again. Chapter 787. The Western Pure Land. In the eyes of mortals, the so-called Western Pure Land was the great thunderclap temple of Spirited Mountain. However, the reality was that the Western Pure Land was the place where the two sages of the West lived. Opening up the void and creating a world were unique to the sages. However, the world created by the sages was also included in the three realms. If the outside world was destroyed, the world created by the sages would also vanish. To put it bluntly, becoming a sage through merit was a gift from the heavenly way. Even the sages had to rely on the heavens and earth to be born, let alone the world created by the sages. Whoosh! Golden waves rose and fell in the boundless golden sea of bitterness. Spirited mountains and blessed lands stood on both sides of the sea of bitterness. The golden light of Buddha illuminated the boundless void. Golden lotuses could be seen blooming in the waves of the sea of bitterness from time to time. A bamboo raft moved with the waves. It seemed to be drifting in the sea of bitterness, but it was as steady as Mount Tai as it moved forward in the waves. On the bamboo raft, the two sages of the West smiled. The light of Buddha lingered around them. Yi Xian sat cross-legged on the bamboo raft with his eyes closed. Wisps of chaotic divine light lingered around him. It was obvious that he was healing his injuries. The sea of bitterness is boundless. Turn back and you'll see the shore. However, if you cross the sea of bitterness, you'll see the shore of light. Just like you, little friend Yi, you should let go of your killing intent and focus on practicing Buddhism with us, Jian said with a smile. Yi Xian slowly opened his eyes. He looked calmly at the boundless water and asked in a hoarse voice, "What is Buddha?" Delivering all living beings and helping them to do good. This is Buddha. Zhuanti put his palms together and chanted the name of Buddha. He gave Yi Xian a so-called answer. Then do the two of you think you're Buddha? Yi Xian raised his eyes to look at the two saints of the West as a mocking smile appeared on his face. Looking at Yi Xian's mocking expression, the two Western saints didn't feel any anger. Instead, they said with a kind expression, "The two of us founded Buddhism to benefit all living things. If you think that the two of us are Buddhas, then we are Buddhas. If you are Buddhas, then what am I? Devil?" Yi Xian asked in a hoarse voice. Along the way, the two sages of the West had been constantly instilling Buddhist ideals into him. However, Yi Xian had ignored the two of them. It was only when they entered the Western Pure Land that Yi Xian finally spoke. "Lay down the butcher's knife and become a Buddha immediately. Even a devil can become a Buddha," Kundi said softly. "Zhuanti, according to what you said, as long as the devil is willing to lay down his butcher's knife, he can become a Buddha. But why can't those who are wholeheartedly good become Buddhas?" Yi Xian smiled. Hearing Yi Xian's words, Kundi's breath was slightly stifled. What is Buddha? What is a devil? It's just a one-sided statement from the two of you. In this world, only great power is fundamental. The weak can only act according to the rules of the strong. For example, I, Yi Xian, am not as strong as the two of you. You can call me a devil because the weak have no right to speak. This is the essence of this world. The so-called Buddha and devil are just a big joke. The strong are as heavy as a mountain, and the weak crawl like a dog. Isn't this the truth? Yi Xian's smile was no longer there. His voice was still hoarse, but his face was ferocious and sinister. He looked at the two sages of the West with blatant contempt. "How dare you?" Kundi's smile was no longer there. He looked like a Buddhist Vajra with angry eyes. His terrible holy might set off waves of the bitter sea, turning the golden bitter sea suddenly as dark as ink. "It seems that I have exposed your hypocrisy and made you angry? Haha." Yi Xian laughed wildly. His laughter contained great sarcasm, and he did not care about the terrible holy might that Kundi was releasing. "Junior brother, you are thinking too much." Jane frowned. A breeze blew across the bitter sea, and Kundi's anger disappeared quietly. Kindness appeared on his face again. He put his palms together and said, "Thank you for your advice, senior brother. I am ashamed. Little friend Yi, you are right. This world is indeed full of strong people, but we Buddhists have always been good. We have the 7 pure rules to restrain ourselves. We also slay demons and devils to save all living beings in the 3 realms. We also make all living beings revere our Buddhism from the bottom of their hearts. This is not achieved just because of power." Jane spoke tirelessly, chanting the name of Buddha in a low voice. He was promoting the purpose of Buddhism to save people and do good. "Ha!" A sneer appeared on the corner of Yi Xian's mouth, as he looked at the two Western saints with disdain once again. "Then let me ask you, if there were no demons in this world, there would be no Buddha's mercy. Then what is the use of Buddhism? At the beginning of the world, the clear air rose to the sky, and the turbid air sank to the earth. This world was divided into yin and yang. The sun rose to yang, and the moon fell to yin. All living beings were divided into men and women. All living beings in this world were separated into yang and yin. Even the orthodoxies between heaven and earth were divided into good and evil. All living beings coexisted with each other. You don't even understand this principle, and want to instill the so-called essence of Buddhism into me. Isn't that a joke?" Yi Xian was eloquent and eloquent. Jane's kind face gradually disappeared. His face was extremely gloomy, and he could not refute. It was not that they did not understand Yi Xian's point of view. Truly speaking, this was the way of heaven and earth. However, to them Buddhists this was simply absurd. If these words were allowed to circulate in Buddhism, it would definitely cause a great disaster. The two sages of the West finally stopped talking, and stopped talking to Yi Xian. Obviously, the two of them also realized that continuing to talk to Yi Xian would only make them angry. Before they could convert Yi Xian, their own dharma and way would be disrupted by Yi Xian. Yi Xian sneered as he watched the two Western saints remain silent. He closed his eyes and sat cross-legged once more. However, Yi Xian's eyes were extremely heavy. It was obvious that he wasn't as calm and complacent as he appeared on the surface. Yi Xian had never cared to argue, Although he seemed to have won the debate with the two sages of the West, it was of no use to him. Cultivation, strength, these were the foundation. Everything else was but an illusion. Moreover, Yi Xian knew very well that at this moment, he had fallen into the hands of the two sages of the West. What awaited him was definitely not a good thing. Even if he wanted to escape from the two sages of the West, it would be harder than ascending to the heavens. Who could save the two sages? This was simply a deadlock. Yi Xian could not break out of this deadlock unless he could pass the three tribulations of the way of heaven and possess a cultivation comparable to that of a sage. Or if Tao ancestor Hongjun appeared, he could regain his freedom. However, these two methods were simply impossible to achieve. At this moment, he was only a sage to be. The first tribulation of the way of heaven had yet to descend, let alone pass the three tribulations of the way of heaven, and possess a cultivation comparable to that of a sage. As for Tao ancestor Hongjun, he was extremely mysterious. In the past, he had almost destroyed Yi Xian's path of Tao through strength. How could he appear and rescue Yi Xian from the two sages of the West? This was simply a fantasy. Chapter 788. Now, Yi Xian could only save himself. There was no other way. However, no matter how hard Yi Xian racked his brains, he could not think of a way to escape from the control of the two sages of the West. Not to mention that he was now seriously injured, and his cultivation had fallen to the bottom. Even if he was at his peak, he was just an ant in front of the two sages of the West. There was no way he could resist at all. Since he could not think of a way to break out, Yi Xian did not think about it anymore. He could only heal his injuries as soon as possible and restore himself to his peak. This was the only thing he could do at the moment. Whoosh! The waves of the Sea of Bitterness were turbulent. The bamboo raft moved along with the current. After 3 days, the boundless Sea of Bitterness finally changed. A Tongtian mountain range appeared at the end of the Sea of Bitterness. The mountains rose and fell one after another. Golden Buddha's light shone among the mountains. Judging from its appearance, it was tens of thousands of miles wide. In the middle of the mountains, there was a giant peak that pierced the sky. A large number of Buddhist scriptures were inscribed on the thick mountain. The rumbling sound of Buddhist scriptures came from the void of the heavens, giving people a sense of boundless grandeur and a sense of reverence. Come! Kundi flicked his sleeves, and the bamboo raft under his feet turned into a golden decree. It directly carried the three of them toward the giant peak that pierced the sky and made them disappear into the Sea of Bitterness. Primordial Mountain. A golden stone tablet stood on the giant peak that pierced the sky. 2 golden Buddhist scriptures were inscribed on the stone tablet. This was the Taoist field of the two sages of the West. At the beginning of the Yuan, all Buddhas were born. At the beginning of the chaos, Yin and Yang were divided. This was the origin of the mountain's name. At the peak of Primordial Mountain, the Buddha's light shone. A Bodhi tree was rooted on it. Under the Bodhi tree, there was a misty spiritual pond. The pond water shone with golden light and was full of Buddhist aura. When one breathed in, it gave people the feeling of ascending to immortality. Little friendy, this is our Taoist field. This tree is the root of all Taoism, and is also the place where we achieved Taoism. The spirit pool behind us is called the Myriad Buddha Spirit Pool. Not only can it heal your injuries, but it can also improve your cultivation. Kundi was holding the Tree of 7 Wonders and introducing it to Yi Xian with a smile. Cultivate your body and mind. Grind away the murderous aura in your heart. As long as little friend Yi is wholeheartedly kind, the two of us will definitely let little friend Yi go. We won't stop you in the slightest, Jia Yin and Shan said. Without waiting for Yi Xian's reply, the two of them sat cross-legged under the Bodhi tree. As the Buddha's light shone in front of the two of them, a black chessboard appeared. They actually chose to ignore Yi Xian and started to play. Such a scene stunned Yi Xian on the spot. He had thought that the two of them would definitely reveal their purpose in coming to the training hall of the two Western sages. But what Yi Xian saw at this moment made him feel bewildered. No, it's definitely not right. There must be something that I don't know about. Yi Xian instantly became alert and stared at the two Western sages. He did not believe that the two of them did not have any purpose for him. let alone being so kind to him. They really just wanted to teach him to do good. Yi Xian clearly remembered that the two Western sages did not hesitate to offend Nuwa and Yuanshi Tianzuan in order to take him away. This was karma between sages, and it could be said that the two Western sages had paid a great price. The two of them had paid such a great price just to bring him here, to grind away his murderous aura. Yi Xian would never believe such a ridiculous thing. What exactly were the two Western sages planning? Yi Xian kept asking himself in his heart, but he could not find the answer he wanted. This also made his eyes gloomy, but he could not open his mouth to test the two of them. Myriad Buddha spiritual pool? Yi Xian glanced at the pool behind the Bodhi tree. He could completely feel that the Myriad Buddha spiritual pool was filled with an extremely large amount of spiritual energy. It was indeed a timely help for his current injuries. Forget it, I'll heal my injuries first. I want to see what the two Western sages are after. Yi Xian thought of this and strode towards the Myriad Buddha spiritual pool. When he heard the sound of splashing water, Yi Xian also sat cross-legged in the Myriad Buddha spiritual pool and began to heal his injuries frantically. Rumble! The Myriad Buddha spiritual pool was indeed miraculous. The spiritual energy was terrifyingly viscous. It surged madly into Yi Xian's body and healed his injuries at an extremely fast speed. As the saying went, those who were barefooted were not afraid of those who were wearing shoes. Yi Xian had already come this far, so he simply did not care about the dangers of the Myriad Buddha spiritual pool. If the two Western sages wanted to kill him, they would not have to go through so much trouble. Devouring the spiritual energy of the Myriad Buddha spiritual pool, Yi Xian's origin immortal body glowed, and his cracked body gradually healed. Even the indestructible true spirit in his sea of consciousness was rapidly rotating. Everything was progressing in a good direction. Swish! Swish! The Myriad Buddha spiritual pool was truly miraculous, and it was worthy of being the spiritual pool of the two Western sages. No matter how Yi Xian absorbed the spiritual energy, the Myriad Buddha spiritual pool seemed endless. Comfortable, extremely comfortable. As Yi Xian greedily devoured the energy of the Myriad Buddha spiritual pool, his injuries rapidly healed. Day after day, year after year, time passed very quickly. Yi Xian stayed in the Myriad Buddha spiritual pool for a full 3,000 years, and finally, after 3,100 years, his injuries were completely healed. 3,000 years was an unimaginable number for mortals, but to Yi Xian, it was only a blink of an eye. It took him more than 3,000 years to recover from his injuries. From this, it could be seen how terrifying the injuries Yi Xian suffered were. As the saying went, fortune and misfortune depended on each other, and fortune and misfortune lurked within. If the two Western sages had not brought Yi Xian here, even if he had been able to escape from Nuwa and Yuanshi to the lower realm, it would have taken an unimaginable amount of time to heal his injuries. It would have taken tens of thousands of years at the very least. In for a penny, in for a pound. Although his injuries had been healed and Yi Xian had finally returned to his prime, the Myriad Buddha spiritual pool was indeed miraculous and filled with endless spiritual energy. Yi Xian naturally would not give up such a good opportunity. He would definitely make good use of the Myriad Buddha spiritual pool to improve his cultivation. Swish! 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 Yi Xian frantically absorbed the golden spiritual energy. He constantly refined the spiritual energy for his own use. Yi Xian could also feel that his cultivation was slowly increasing. Although the increase was extremely subtle, it did have a significant effect. This also made Yi Xian extremely excited. However, Yi Xian did not see that the two Western sages, who were under the Bodhi tree, had a mysterious smile on their lips, as if everything was under their control. The sages' thoughts were uncertain, and the will of the sages could not be defied. In the Yuan Mountain, which was the Tao field of the two Western sages, everything would not be so simple. Although Yi Xian did not see the mysterious smile on the two Western sages' faces, he was always on guard against them. However, Yi Xian also knew that the two Western sages would not be so simple. There would come a day when they would bare their fangs, and all he could do was wait. Yes, he could only wait. To deal with all changes by sticking to the status quo, This was Yi Xian's only way. Chapter 789. No. It still didn't work. Why was it like this? Yi Xian sat cross-legged in the middle of the 10,000 Buddha spirit pond, as endless golden spiritual energy poured into his body. This state had already lasted for a full 5,000 years, but his own cultivation had long since stagnated and didn't advance at all. In the past, Yi Xian had successfully entered the sage-to-be realm, after bathing in the blood of the ancestral dragon, and completing the Daoyuo immortal body. Because he walked the path of proving the Tao through strength, he was considered a top figure among the sage-to-be. Even the 2 demon emperors had been defeated by him. However, the path of the sage-to-be had just begun. This was not the end of Yi Xian's journey, but his beginning. Proving the Tao through strength, and overcoming the 9 tribulations of the heavenly Tao was the path Yi Xian had to take in the sage-to-be realm. Yi Xian also understood this very well. After overcoming the 3 tribulations of the heavenly Tao, one's cultivation would be comparable to a saint's. Yi Xian knew this very well. However, he had not even experienced the first tribulation of the heavenly Tao, let alone possess the combat strength of a saint. Shackles, an insurmountable shackle. Yi Xian felt that blindly cultivating was useless. No matter how much spiritual qi there was, it could not improve his cultivation. Yi Xian had a feeling that if he wanted to break through the shackles in front of him, he had to overcome the first tribulation of the heavenly Tao. Only then could his cultivation improve by leaps and bounds. However, a very funny thing happened. Yi Xian did not sense the first tribulation of the heavenly Tao, let alone break through the shackles in front of him. The path of proving the Tao through strength was not tolerated by the heavenly Tao. Yi Xian understood this very well. He also knew that it was not as easy to overcome the 9 tribulations of the heavenly Tao. However, if his cultivation remained stagnant, when could he kill Nuwa and Yuanshi? Yi Xian could only put this matter aside for the time being, because he was now in the Taoist temple of the 2 sages of the West. He did not know what dangers were waiting for him. Yi Xian emerged from the water and walked out of the myriad Buddha spiritual pond. His body was bathed in dazzling golden light as he looked at the 2 saints of the West. The 2 sages of the West were gentle and silent. They were playing chess under the Bodhi tree and had not done anything else since the beginning. However, Yi Xian knew very well that he had been cultivating in the myriad Buddha spiritual pool for 8,000 years, but the 2 of them had not done anything strange. This made Yi Xian even more vigilant. Little friend, congratulations on your recovery. Suddenly, Zhuan Ti looked up at Yi Xian and nodded at him with a smile. Then, he focused on playing chess with Jie Yin. Tap, tap, tap. Yi Xian narrowed his eyes and walked slowly towards the Bodhi tree. He stopped in front of the 2 and looked at the black and white chessboard in front of them. When Yi Xian saw the black and white chessboard, his eyes were slightly stunned. Then, his brows suddenly knitted together, and there was a look of surprise in his eyes. The black and white chessboard was very strange. The black and white sides only surrounded each other, but did not attack. The small chessboard was full of black and white chess pieces. Obviously, the game had reached its final moment. Yi Xian was conceited. He was also a master in chess, and was proficient in all 4 arts. The black and white sides on the chessboard were evenly matched. At the moment, there were not many places for them to place their pieces. Every piece could determine the outcome of the game. Little friend, you know chess too? Jie Yin suddenly looked up with a kind smile on his face. I know a little. Yi Xian nodded and said, Little friend, who do you think will win and who will lose in this game? Jie Yin asked with a smile. They are evenly matched. Both sides want to defeat the other in one move. Unfortunately, it is only a draw in the end. Yi Xian answered truthfully. Little friend, you are wrong. We are not playing chess, but the general trend of heaven and earth. How about you take a closer look? Zhuan Ti smiled mysteriously. Yi Xian frowned and looked at the black and white chessboard again. However, at this moment something strange happened. The black and white chessboard suddenly burst out with a bright Buddha's light. Yi Xian's consciousness was suddenly in a trance. Boom! This was a vast and boundless space. There was no up or down, no 8 directions. There was only the sea of Buddha and the golden lotus. There was also the Buddha's light shining all over the sky. There was also the sound of chanting. Swoosh! The golden light covered the sky and the earth. A big swastika appeared and kept rotating above Yi Xian's head. There was also the sound of chanting. At this moment, Yi Xian opened his eyes in a daze. When he saw everything in front of him, his expression changed because he knew that the 2 sages of the West had finally made a move on him. Black gas lingered and the devil light surged. Yi Xian seemed to have become an anomaly in this Buddhist space. The Buddha's light shone in all directions, and he was the only anomaly in this place. You want to convert me? Yi Xian muttered to himself coldly. The swastika above his head was pouring the auspicious Buddha's light on him. It was constantly obliterating the devil light and evil qi around him, giving him a sense of dizziness. The great Tao of heaven and earth, Buddhism descends into the world. The sea of suffering saves all living beings. The golden lotus gives birth to new life. Great freedom and great freedom. You can become a saint and promote the essence of Buddhism. Vast and boundless, the chanting rumbled. Wisps of Buddha's light fell on Yi Xian. The sound of the gods and Buddhas in the heavens was coming. It gave Yi Xian a splitting headache, but he tried his best to endure it. What is Buddha? What is devil? Yi Xian's hair was in a mess as he roared at the sky. No matter how the Buddha's light obliterated his will, it could not shake his own Dharma and Tao. He asked the heavens, but did not speak. He heard the earth trembling, but did not panic. No one answered Yi Xian's question. Only the endless Buddha's light poured down on him. It was as if he was an anomaly in this world. Only by converting him into the Buddha's light could he return to the right path. If the heavens are unfair, I will pierce through them. If Buddhism surrenders to me, I will kill Buddhas and immortals. Yi Xian's will was indelible. He had gone through countless dangers to achieve his Dharma and Tao. He only believed in himself and not the heavens, not to mention the so-called profound meaning of Buddhism. Ugh! Suddenly, Yi Xian let out an extremely painful cry. Endless golden flames burst out of his body and instantly covered his entire body. These 2 old bald donkeys are so insidious. Yi Xian roared ferociously. His expression had become extremely twisted because he finally understood one thing. It turned out that although the spiritual qi he absorbed in the myriad Buddha spiritual pool healed his injuries and improved his cultivation, the spiritual qi nurtured the will of Buddhism. At this moment, it turned into the Golden Lotus Buddha's fire to convert him. The Golden Lotus Buddha's fire was one of the most terrifying flames in the world. It was also a technique unique to the 2 sages of the West. The Golden Lotus Buddha's fire was not used to kill people, but to convert people from their roots. What was conversion? Let's put it this way. There was an old saying that went, "It's easy to change mountains and rivers, but it's hard to change one's nature." A person's nature could not be changed. However, the Golden Lotus Buddha's fire could convert a person who was evil and evil into a person who was pure and kind. Chapter 790. This seemed like a kind of benevolent technique, but in fact, it was extremely vicious. A person's personality and thoughts were their own. If they changed into another person after being converted, would they still be themselves? After absorbing the spiritual energy of the myriad Buddha spirit pond for 8,000 years, although Yi Xian had been cautious and had abandoned all the Buddha nature in it and devoured the most essential power, the Buddha nature in it had quietly rooted itself in his body. Even Yi Xian couldn't detect it. At this moment, Yi Xian finally understood. When he came to Primordial Mountain, the 2 sages of the West had already taken action against him. When he walked out of the myriad Buddha spirit pond, the 2 sages of the West had finally bared their fangs. Ugh! The Golden Lotus Buddha fire was purifying his body and mind. Not only was it erasing the ferocious aura on his body, the Buddha fire was also entwining around his indestructible true spirit. It was like a maggot in his bones, gradually changing his will. Pain. It was a pain that went deep into his bones. Fear. He was terrified to the extreme. This was what Yi Xian felt at this moment. The pain coming from his body wasn't unbearable, but his will was gradually weakening. His indestructible true spirit was stagnant, and a Buddha nature was quietly growing in his heart. If this continued, he would be converted, losing his true self, and turning into a Buddha nature. From then on, Yi Xian would become even more serious. Although Yi Xian didn't die, he was undoubtedly dead. This was because the Buddha nature Yi Xian wasn't himself at all. And this was the goal of the two sages of the West. Tribulation transcend or transformation. Suddenly, Yi Xian roared towards the sky. His gray hair turned blood red from the tip to the root, and his fierce eyes turned blood red. He hoped that he could rely on the tribulation transcend or transformation to resist this great tribulation. Buzz! Buzz! The word Buddha rotated, converting everything. Endless Buddha light submerged Yi Xian. Under the support of the endless Buddha light, the golden lotus Buddha fire burned, even more terrifying. In the blink of an eye, the blood-red light and murderous aura around Yi Xian's body shattered, and the buffs brought by the tribulation transcend or transformation also disappeared without a trace. Damn it! Yi Xian was half kneeling on the ground. He roared ferociously and kept smashing his fists on the ground. However, the ferocious aura on his body was quickly being wiped out. What replaced it was a peaceful Buddhist light, and a swastika mark was faintly visible on his forehead. It was dangerous, extremely dangerous. If he continued to be converted like this, Yi Xian would definitely lose himself and completely transform into a Buddhist monk. From then on, he would no longer be himself. Heaven-destroying halberd! Yi Xian roared ferociously. His glabella glowed, and the heaven-destroying halberd rippled out. It was releasing an ancient ferocious aura as it slammed towards the swastika above his head. Clang! The symbol of the swastika rotated and was indestructible. Although the heaven-destroying halberd was known as the #1 killing weapon of all time, the symbol of the swastika was not a physical object. It was an indescribable thing that could not cause any harm to the halberd. Arg! Yi Xian groaned in pain. The golden lotus Buddha fire was getting more and more terrifying. The heaven-destroying halberd fell to the ground. Yi Xian had lost his final trump card. This caused his eyes to weaken and his consciousness to become even more blurred. Amitabha! Suddenly, a loud and clear Buddhist chant came out from Yi Xian's mouth. The Buddhist light around his body shone brightly. His originally weak eyes were emitting a golden light, and there was even a hint of compassion overflowing from them. No, no. Suddenly, Yi Xian's compassionate face was no longer there. It became twisted and ferocious once again. The Buddhist light in his eyes turned into a ferocious aura. It was obvious that Yi Xian's consciousness was constantly resisting the Buddhist nature produced by his body. The golden lotus Buddha fire was burning brightly. Yi Xian crawled on the ground and resisted it bitterly. His body sometimes emitted a ferocious aura, and sometimes emitted a golden Buddhist light. The two auras were constantly changing on his body. It was extremely strange to look at. Under the Bodhi tree, the two sages of the West were sitting cross-legged. However, their compassionate looks were long gone. The two of them stared at the black chessboard in front of them, as if they were watching Yi Xian's changes through the black and white chessboard. Yi Xian is really good. He can actually hold on to this extent. Zhuanti said in a heavy voice. Don't worry, junior brother. The golden lotus Buddha fire purifies all things in the world. Yi Xian has absorbed the spiritual energy of innumerable Buddhas for 8,000 years. He definitely won't be able to hold on for long, Jane said with certainty. However, there was a solemn look in his eyes. It was obvious that he was also extremely serious at this moment, and was not as calm as he appeared to be. Senior brother, although you and I have been planning for a long time, and it can be said that we can safely bring this child back to Yuan Mountain. This child is the protagonist of the great tribulation of heaven and earth. Junior brother, I'm afraid, Zhuanti said hesitantly. Junior brother, if you want Buddhism to prosper, this risk must be taken. As long as Yi Xian becomes a member of Buddhism, we will have 3 sages. When that time comes, we won't even need to fear the 3 pure ones, Jane said with narrowed eyes. Senior brother, are you really sure that he is the 7th saint of heaven's will? Zhuanti asked solemnly. It must be him. There is no mistake about it. The great tribulation of heaven and earth has already begun. Yi Xian has stirred up chaos in the three realms for 100,000 years, but he has been safe and sound. There is no one like him in the three realms. If he is not the seventh saint of heaven's will, who else is worthy of this position? Moreover, junior brother, don't forget why Nuwa is determined to kill him. It is because she has karma with Yi Xian. Nuwa is afraid that Yi Xian will become a saint. She is even more afraid that Yi Xian will settle accounts with her in the future, Jane said with great certainty. Hearing Jane's words, Zhuanti's expression changed. There was even a faint look of worry in his eyes. He said, Senior brother, if he is really the seventh saint of heaven's will, what we have done today is much greater than what we have done to Nuwa. If we can't convert him into a member of Buddhism, I'm afraid that if he escapes here and becomes a saint in the future, you and I will also. Zhuanti's voice trembled slightly. There was even a look of fear in his eyes. This was because the seventh saint of heavens would determine the overall situation of the world in the future. If they were to bear the consequences, the two sages of the West would be extremely ruthless. Don't worry, junior brother. The Golden Lotus Buddha fire will not kill him, nor will it take his life. It will only obliterate his ferocity. As long as we can convert him into a member of Buddhism, he will be our junior brother from then on. With our help, we can quickly make him the seventh saint of heaven's will. What do we Buddhists have to fear in the three realms? Jane said solemnly. Boundless heaven and earth, all dharma shall perish. Suddenly, just as the two sages of the West were talking, a shrill and angry roar came from the black and white chessboard. The entire chessboard shook violently. With a loud bang, a scene that stunned the two sages of the West appeared. Crack! The black chessboard first cracked like a spider web, and then it exploded in front of the two sages. The light of Buddha that burst out sprinkled on Mount Yuan. Yi Xian's blood-soaked figure fell in front of the two sages with a loud bang. He actually destroyed his own cultivation? Is this kid crazy? After the two sages of the West recovered from their shock, they whispered in horror. They looked at Yi Xian with trembling eyes. Chapter 791. You want to convert me? You're dreaming. Yi Xian's body cracked, and wisps of death aura wrapped around him. However, his bloody eyes stared viciously at the two sages of the West. What a ferocious demon! The shock on Jane's face faded and turned into a gloomy one. He looked at Yi Xian with great anger. You destroyed all your cultivation and forced out all your innumerable Buddha spiritual energy. You're really ruthless, Zhuanti said gloomily. There was no trace of peace on his face. Ha ha ha. Looking at the gloomy faces of the two sages of the West, Yi Xian couldn't help but laugh wildly. Just as the two had said, he was being converted by the Golden Lotus Buddha fire in the black and white chessboard, and his will was gradually being obliterated. Even the tribulation transcender transformation and the heaven-destroying halberd couldn't help him survive this great tribulation. However, at the last moment, Yi Xian had a flash of inspiration and suddenly thought of a solution. Since the Golden Lotus Buddha fire originated from the innumerable Buddha spiritual energy and gushed out from his limbs and bones, as long as he dispersed all the innumerable Buddha spiritual energy in his body, he could escape from this great tribulation. Dispersing the innumerable Buddha spiritual energy was equivalent to destroying his cultivation and returning him to the state of being seriously injured and dying. This was a great tribulation for Yi Xian. But Yi Xian only had one way to escape this disaster. Fortunately, Yi Xian made the right bet. When he dispersed his cultivation and forced out the innumerable Buddha spiritual energy, the Golden Lotus Buddha fire dissipated, and he finally escaped from the black and white chessboard. Puff! Yi Xian spat out a mouthful of golden light, which made Yi Xian gasp violently. However, the two sages of the West didn't see the shock in Yi Xian's eyes. Crack! It was as if the heavens and earth were exploding. Yi Xian's mind trembled as he felt as if something within his body was shattering. An extremely mysterious flow of air was actually growing within his body, and it was circulating through his meridians at an extremely fast speed. The shackles had been broken? Yi Xian's eyes were glazed over as he screamed inwardly. The mysterious power in his body was terrifying to the extreme. It was frantically repairing his shattered 8 extraordinary meridians. But it didn't produce any strange phenomena. The first tribulation of the heavenly Tao. Was this the first tribulation of the heavenly Tao? Yi Xian roared in his heart, as he came to a sudden realization. The golden lotus Buddha fire that was born from the 10,000 Buddha spiritual energy was his first tribulation of the heavenly Tao. He had actually accidentally dispersed his cultivation and passed through the first tribulation of the heavenly Tao. Without destruction, there can be no construction. Only by shedding a cocoon and transforming into a butterfly can one be reborn. Yi Xian roared in his heart. He clenched his fists tightly as an extremely terrifying power quietly grew in his body. However, he did his best not to let it leak out, because the 2 saints of the West were right in front of him. He could not let them discover his abnormality, and he could not let them know that he was undergoing a terrifying transformation at this moment. Stubborn, you deserve to die. Bang! With a flick of his sleeve, Jane sent Yi Xian flying. His face was filled with rage, and Yi Xian fell heavily to the ground. Blood gushed out of his mouth, and he looked extremely miserable. Senior brother, don't be angry. Zhuanti hurriedly tried to dissuade him. Although he also wanted to kill Yi Xian was of great use to them. They couldn't really kill him. This boy is so vicious that he would rather destroy his own cultivation than join us Buddhists. How should we deal with him? Jane said angrily. Obviously, the 2 saints of the West wanted to convert Yi Xian into a Buddhist, but they failed at the last minute. How could Jane not be resentful? Now that their purpose had been revealed and Yi Xian knew about it, Yi Xian was already on guard. This made it even more difficult for the 2 saints of the West. Senior brother, don't be impatient. Zhuanti whispered and pulled Jane to the other side. They were discussing something in a low voice. Yi Xian was lying on the ground in the distance, covered in blood, as if he had fallen into a coma. Without destruction, there can be no construction. After destruction, there can be construction. The tribulation of the heavenly way. The sage-to-be is invincible. Yi Xian seemed to be heavily injured and on the verge of death. His deathly white bones were exposed, and his entire body was dripping with blood. However, earth-shattering changes were occurring within his body, especially the undying true spirit in his sea of consciousness, which had actually swelled up by a circle, becoming even darker as it crazily rotated within his sea of consciousness. Power, powerful power. This power did not exist in the 3 realms, but it had appeared in Yi Xian's body. Not only was it secretly healing his injuries, but it was also adding to his body an imperishable true spirit. Powerful, very powerful, very powerful. Yi Xian's heart was filled with excitement. His eyes, which were originally filled with despair, flickered with excitement. This was because not only was his crippled cultivation crazily recovering, his own cultivation was also increasing at an extremely terrifying speed. Invincible sage-to-be. These 4 simple words explain Yi Xian's current state. After passing the first tribulation of the heavenly Tao, he had a qualitative improvement. This improvement was so terrifying that it was impossible to describe it to others. If Yi Xian had been at the peak of the sage-to-be and had defeated the 2 demon emperors with serious injuries, then Yi Xian, who had passed the first tribulation of the heavenly Tao, could easily suppress the 2 demon emperors when he faced them again. This was the difference between them. However, this was not what excited Yi Xian the most. What excited Yi Xian the most was that a black power had appeared in his body. This power was mysterious and profound. It even faintly emitted a holy light. It actually contained a trace of a saint's aura. Of course, this trace of a saint's aura was extremely weak. It was so weak that even Yi Xian himself could not detect it. However, it truly existed in Yi Xian's body. Fierce, violent, domineering. All kinds of domineering words could not describe how Yi Xian felt about this power. However, Yi Xian had a deep understanding of one thing. This extremely weak saint power was extremely powerful and terrifying. It could not be compared to the power produced by merits and holiness. This was because this was his law and Tao. It was also the most direct manifestation of the law of proving Tao through strength, breeding, nurturing, growing. This power was hidden in the deepest part of Yi Xian's body. In the future, It would definitely bring Yi Xian unimaginable growth. Phew! Yi Xian exhaled a mouthful of turbid air. He slowly opened his eyes and silently hid this power. Even though he had passed the first tribulation of the heavenly Tao, he was still no match for the two sages of the West. He still needed to continue enduring. His body was broken, and his bones were exposed. Yi Xian deliberately did not repair the surface of his body. He appeared to be in an extremely weak state. He even dispersed the power in his body, leaving only a trace of terrifying saint power hidden in his body. Only by deceiving the sages, and deceiving them, could he not let the two sages of the West notice his abnormality. This was also what Yi Xian had to do. At this moment, Yi Xian sat cross-legged. He looked at the two sages of the West, and saw them talking under the Bodhi tree. However, the two sages were so powerful that they had already sealed the void. Yi Xian did not know what they were talking about. However, even though he could not hear their conversation, Yi Xian knew that the two sages of the West would never let him go. As for what he would face next, he could only prepare in advance. Chapter 792. Under the Bodhi tree, the two sages of the West talked for a long time until the light of Buddha, that sealed off the void, dissipated. The two sages of the West also walked out from under the Bodhi tree. Yi Xian. The two sages of the West strolled forward until they came in front of Yi Xian. Their faces were no longer peaceful, and even the light of Buddha that was blooming around them was no longer there. They were looking at Yi Xian with an unfathomable gaze. "You two old bald donkeys, what other tricks do you have?" Yi Xian cursed agitatedly, but his eyes were extremely calm. He was paying attention to the two sages of the West's movements. "Yi Xian, we don't want to make things difficult for you. If you had just joined us, we would not have done this." Jane shook his head and sighed. "The great way of heaven and earth is the origin of all Buddhas. What's wrong with joining us? You can be free and unfettered. From now on, you are the junior brother of the two sages of the West. In the future, even if you want to settle your scores with Nuwa and Yuanshi, how can we just sit by and watch?" Zhuanti said softly. Hearing the words of the two sages of the West, Yi Xian's heart suddenly skipped a beat. An extremely bad feeling grew in his heart, as if he was about to encounter an unprecedented catastrophe. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. Previously, the two sages of the West had been hypocritical and kind, but now their faces were solemn and extremely serious. They no longer looked as pretentious as before. Obviously, they must have decided on something. Otherwise, they would never have shown such an attitude. They no longer pretended and revealed their true nature. At this moment, the two sages of the West were showing their true temperament. There was no so-called benevolence and peace, no so-called light of Buddha shining, and no preaching their Buddhist ideals. "Run!" This simple word explained Yi Xian's state. He suddenly turned into a ray of light and fled to the outside world. His expression was extremely serious, because he was extremely sensitive to danger. The two sages of the West were definitely going to use some kind of terrifying means on him. Everyone below the sage level is a nonentity. "Junior brother, where can you escape to?" Zhuanti said calmly. With a wave of his hand, he sealed the world, and an invisible force detained Yi Xian. Qi, qi, qi. The void fluctuated and ripples appeared. Streaks of golden light were born in the void. Jie Yin put his palms together, and his expression was solemn. He was chanting a mysterious scripture in a low voice. Even the sound of chanting could be heard in the void. "Come." The two saints of the West sat cross-legged under the Bodhi tree. Yi Xian was like a rootless duckweed that was imprisoned by the two of them. He directly sat cross-legged between the two of them, and the sound of chanting in the sky became even louder. Yi Xian's sages of the West. Were his eyes? Yi Xian was. His eyes were. And he was were sages of the the two sages of the West. Were his chants. Yi was were of the sages of the time of the were of the of them. Forcibly convert and change the spirit. These simple words explained Yi Xian's current situation. Since the Golden Lotus Buddha fire could not convert Yi Xian into a Buddhist, It was impossible for Yi Xian to willingly join the Western Buddhism. The two sages of the West had no choice but to resort to forceful means. When the Buddhist chants entered one's ears, the sages unleashed their power. This was soul conversion. Not only could the Buddhist chants change one's nature, but it could also turn one into a devout Buddhist. This method was unique to the two sages of the West. It was an extremely terrifying method of the sages. The two sages of the West did not want to use this method unless they had no other choice. This method had a huge drawback. This method was extremely vicious. The success rate of forcibly changing one's nature was less than 30%. The failure rate was as high as 70%, and the victim's soul would scatter and die. Yes, the victim's soul would scatter and die. After a long discussion, the two sages of the West could only choose this method. If they could not convert Yi Xian into a Buddhist, he might as well die. This was the two sages of the West's last resort. Rumble. The light of Buddha fell from the sky. The chanting of the two sages of the West became more solemn and loud. Yi Xian's face was distorted to the extreme, as if his head was about to explode. Ah! Yi Xian let out a shrill roar and looked up to the sky. He felt that his immortal spiritual body was about to explode, and his own will was quickly being obliterated. It was as if he was being converted by the golden lotus Buddha fire again. However, this time, even if he dispersed all his cultivation, he could not escape this catastrophe. This was because the two sages of the West were attacking him personally. The sages' Buddhist chants could obliterate all things, not to mention that they were joining forces to convert him. Yi Xian gritted his teeth and endured the torment. He could not lose himself and turn into a Buddha. Otherwise, he would be consigned to eternal damnation. What a fierce madman. Kundi suddenly opened his eyes. When he saw Yi Xian using his will to resist the conversion of the two sages, he said in a gloomy voice, "Junior brother, don't be distracted. Convert him quickly," Jane said solemnly. This also made Kundi close his eyes again. The Buddhist chants in his mouth became even more terrifying. Under the Bodhi tree, the two sages of the West were chanting, and the light of Buddha was floating in the void. Yi Xian was completely submerged in the bright light of Buddha. The evil qi that overflowed from his body was quickly obliterated. No, no. In the bright light of Buddha, Yi Xian said weakly. He was prostrating himself on the ground, and his body was involuntarily convulsing. A faint light of Buddha was quietly growing around him. For 49 days, the sound of Buddha reverberated throughout the world. The two sages of the West did not stop. They had been trying their best to convert Yi Xian. The entire Yuan mountain was covered by the light of Buddha. From afar, it looked like a dazzling golden star. Senior brother, 49 years have passed. This lad should have been converted by now, Kundi said softly. No, Yi Xian is no ordinary person. Even though the sound of soul expiation is a saint's skill, you and I still have to be on the safe side. We have to wait for 81 years to ensure that nothing goes wrong, Jane said. Great. Kundi nodded slightly. Rumble. The light of Buddha increased once more, and the sound of Buddha was even louder. In order to ensure that Yi Xian was converted, the two sages of the West did not dare to slack off. They once again used the saint's skill to convert Yi Xian. Time passed like water, and after 81 years, the Buddhist light that filled the sky finally dissipated, and the chanting of sutras in the void came to an abrupt end. Is he alive or dead? Under the Bodhi tree, Jane opened his eyes and looked at Yi Xian. His expression was extremely solemn. Because the sound of soul expiation was too vicious, the success rate was only 30%. If he could not convert Yi Xian would definitely die. He's still breathing. He's not dead, Kundi said in a timely manner. There was great excitement in his voice. Since he's not dead, why is he still unconscious? Jane was delighted at first, but then his expression turned solemn. Even though the sound of soul expiation was vicious, it only changed a person's mind. It did not cause any harm to the caster. Chapter 793. Logically speaking, since Yi Xian had not died, he should be surrounded by the light of Buddha, and should not have fainted. However, on the contrary, Yi Xian was unconscious. and the light of Buddha around him was faintly discernible. This was extremely strange. Could it be that he still failed? Jane frowned and strode toward Yi Xian, wanting to check on Yi Xian's condition. However, before he could reach Yi Xian, what happened next stunned the two sages of the West. Greetings, senior brothers. Under the Bodhi tree, Yi Xian opened his eyes. A light of Buddha flickered in his eyes, and a Buddhist smile appeared on his face. A light of Buddha rose behind him, illuminating him with boundless Buddha nature. He put his palms together and bowed to the two sages of the West. Rumble! Heaven and earth shook, and the light of Buddha illuminated the sky. Above the dome, golden lotuses bloomed in the void. Wisps of light of Buddha grew in all directions, and the sound of chanting came from the void. Clang, clang, clang. The 81 bells of heaven and earth rang out, as the silhouette of a giant Buddha rose up behind Yi Xian. This Buddha's silhouette was exactly the same as Yi Xian's. At this moment, it was sitting cross-legged behind Yi Xian, spanning the heavens and the earth. Sound of Buddha, golden lotuses falling from the sky? Looking at Yi Xian's strange phenomenon, Kundi trembled and spoke, his face overflowing with ecstasy. He looked at Yi Xian, as if he was looking at a peerless treasure. Jane greets junior brother. Jane greets junior brother. Suddenly, the two sages of the West walked up to Yi Xian with smiles on their faces. They put their palms together and bowed to Yi Xian, with the same benevolent smile on their faces. Woo! The fierce wind blew, and the light of Buddha sprinkled down. The black clothes on Yi Xian's body disappeared, and under the shining light of Buddha, a white monk robe appeared on his body. His hair hung loosely behind his head, as if he had turned into an eminent monk. Thank you, senior brothers, for enlightening me and freeing me from my demonic heart. From now on, my heart is devoted to Buddha, and I have no other thoughts. Yi Xian put his palms together and chanted Buddha's name in a low voice. The Buddha's light lingered around his body, giving off a warm and peaceful feeling. Good. Although junior apprentice brother had once entered the demonic path, it is rare for him to return from the wrong path. Senior apprentice brothers are very pleased. Jane smiled and nodded. Juanti smiled and said, Today, junior brother, you have returned from the wrong path and joined the Buddhism sect. Since you can give up your life, why don't you call yourself Qingming? Peering into the heavens above, looking down at the 9 underworlds below, roaming the 3 realms of heaven and earth with the Buddha's heart, encompassing the heaven and earth. The meaning of this name was extremely profound. It was also the Dharma name that the two sages of the West had long prepared for Yi Xian. Qingming. Yi Xian murmured. He then nodded slightly and looked at the two sages of the West. This name is very good. Thank you, senior apprentice brothers, for bestowing this name upon me. Junior apprentice brother, you had previously entered the demonic path and suffered great injuries. Although your ferocious nature has been worn away by the Buddhism sect today, your injuries are still serious. Senior apprentice brothers will help you heal them. Jieyin and Shenghe spoke. At this moment, the two sages of the West were surrounded by holy light. Wisps of Buddha's nature circled around them. They placed their palms directly between Yi Xian's eyebrows. An extremely vast amount of holy power continuously poured into Yi Xian's glabella. Rumble! The holy light was blazing, and the Buddha's light was boundless. The two sages worked together, and Yi Xian's injuries were quickly healed. The Buddha's light around him became even more intense. Buzz! After dozens of breaths, the two sages finally stopped. Yi Xian had also recovered to his peak state. At this moment, he was sitting cross-legged under the Bodhi tree with his eyes closed. A grand and solemn Buddha's voice came from his body. Junior apprentice brother, you should meditate and adjust your breath first. When you wake up from your cultivation, go to the back of the mountain to find us. Senior apprentice brothers have something to say to you. After saying this, Jieyin gave Juanti a look. The two sages turned into light and disappeared. Back of the mountain, the two sages of the West sat on 2 large golden lotus platforms. Wisps of holy light wrapped around them and sealed off this part of the world to ensure that their conversation would not be overheard. Senior apprentice brother, do you think Yi Xian has been converted by us? Juanti's smile was no longer there. There was a worried look in his eyes as he asked Jie. The soul-expiating Buddha's voice is no small matter. If you and I work together to convert him for 81 years, even if he is a Vajra stone, he will be converted successfully. Jie smiled and continued. Just now you and I seemed to be healing his injuries, but we were also checking his actual situation. This child's body is full of Buddhist power, and his indestructible true spirit has turned golden. He has indeed been successfully converted by you and I, and this is absolutely true. But Yi Xian is a cunning person, and he possesses all sorts of mysterious techniques. If he uses some kind of great technique to save you and me, I'm afraid, junior brother. Zhuan Ti wanted to say something but hesitated. However, the worry in his words was extremely obvious. Junior apprentice brother, you worry too much. Don't think too highly of him. You and I are both sages. How can he convert us? Moreover, the soul-expiating Buddha's voice is a sage skill that we created. Even if Yi Xian has great abilities, he will not be able to resolve the soul-expiating Buddha's voice. Jie said with a smile full of confidence. He knew very well how powerful the soul-expiating Buddha's voice was. Moreover, this time they worked together. How could Yi Xian not be converted? Senior apprentice brother, you're right. I think I worry too much. Zhuan nodded, but there was still a touch of worry in his eyes, and a trace of uneasiness in his heart. Zhuan was a meticulous person with an extraordinary intuition. He always felt that there was something wrong with Yi Xian, but he could not tell what was wrong. Zhuan could only suppress this worry. Perhaps he was too sensitive. Yi Xian had already been converted by them. How could he be converted by two sages? Under the Bodhi tree, Yi Xian sat cross-legged, surrounded by the light of Buddha. He chanted the voice of Buddha in a low voice, giving people the feeling that he was an old monk in meditation. From time to time, there was an auspicious qi around him, as if he was really an eminent monk. Buzz! Suddenly, a black light quietly cut through the sky and strangely appeared in front of Yi Xian. As the black light gradually disappeared, an illusory figure appeared. Soul-expiating Buddha's voice? These two old bald donkeys are so ruthless. The black illusory figure said coldly. He strolled in front of Yi Xian, constantly scrutinizing Yi Xian. Wisps of black flowing light twined around him, and a faint killing intent bloomed. To kill or not to kill? The black illusory figure murmured. His appearance was completely covered by the black curtain, making it impossible to see what he looked like. The aura around him gave people a sense of obscurity. Terrifying, extremely terrifying. The black illusory figure had entered the Taoist rite of the two sages of the West without them noticing. This ability alone was unimaginable. My good disciple, do you think I should kill you or not? The black illusory figure's voice was cold and deep. The aura around him was constantly in disorder, proving that he was not calm. Obviously, he was in a state of extreme hesitation. You good for nothing. I gave you the Hong Meng immortal vapor, but you didn't use it to become a sage. You always wanted to get out of my control. If you had become a sage earlier, why would I take the risk to come to the Taoist rite of these two bald donkeys today? Yuan Ling. He was actually Yuan Ling. He was also Yi Xian's first real appearance in front of Yi Xian, since he entered the Earth God realm. At this moment, he raised his hand as if he wanted to kill Yi Xian on the spot. No, I can't kill him. He hasn't become a sage yet. If I kill him, won't all my efforts be in vain? Yuan Ling said hatefully to himself. He finally lowered his raised hand. Chapter 794. Under the Bodhi tree, Yi Xian was sitting cross-legged with the warmth of spring wind and rain. Behind him, Buddhist light lingered. He had a peaceful smile on his face, and was as still as an old monk in meditation. Yuan Ling was mysterious and profound. He was surrounded by black fog, and his aura was obscure. If one didn't see him with their own eyes, they would see him standing in front of Yi Xian. It was impossible to sense his existence. The void was destroyed and killing intent flickered. His origin spirit had never hesitated like this before, because Yi Xian was too important to him. It was so important that if Yi Xian really died at this moment, everything would start over. The Immortal scripture is a forbidden book from beyond the heavens. The creator of this nerve once said that it is immortal and indestructible, and transcends the heavens. Could it be that the soul-cleansing Buddhist voice of two mere Baldis can really convert him? Yuan Ling muttered to herself, as she suddenly looked at Yi Xian. The black mist around her was extremely chaotic. Disciple? Yuan Ling whispered. He stared at Yi Xian through the black fog, hoping to see if Yi Xian was deceiving him. Unfortunately, Yi Xian was still sitting cross-legged like an old monk. It was as if he was really immersed in cultivation. No matter how Yuan Ling called him, he didn't respond at all. Could it be that he's really been enlightened? Yuan Ling frowned as she continuously paced in front of Yi Xian, hoping that her guess was wrong. All techniques returned to one limitless spiritual energy. Suddenly, Yuan Ling stopped in his tracks. The black fog around him evaporated, and a black light grew from his fingertip. He pointed it at Yi Xian. The wind blew. It was a strange black wind that instantly enveloped Yi Xian. However, the Buddhist light around Yi Xian's body suddenly lit up, and a demonic roar sounded out from within his body. Damn it, he really has been converted. This scene made Yuan Ling roar in anger. At the same time, the two Western sages arrived. How dare you? Who trespasses here? Wang. Before the two saints of the West could attack Yuan Ling suddenly turned into a wisp of black smoke and disappeared. No matter how the two saints of the West used their supreme saint techniques, they could not find any trace of Yuan Ling. Who is he? Kundi cried out in shock. He quickly pinched his fingers and displayed the holy technique of heaven and earth, hoping to deduce the identity of the person. However, the result was unknown, which made him extremely solemn. Junior brother, do you still remember that Yuanshi Tianzuan almost killed Yi Xian? Yuanshi's great technique was neutralized by Yuanshi's black light. I'm afraid that the person who just appeared must be closely related to Yi Xian, Jie Yin said gloomily. Senior brother, things are turning stranger and stranger. Apart from us 6 saints, is there another existence in this world that is comparable to us? Kundi asked in horror. Panga split open the heavens, and Hongjun imparted the Tao. But junior brother, have you never thought about what world it was before the creation of the heavens and earth? Where did great god Panga come from? Where did Tao ancestor Hongjun come from? Jie Yin said solemnly. Could this person be someone from beyond the chaos heavens? Kundi muttered in horror. He suddenly looked at Jie Yin, his eyes filled with panic. I don't know. Jie Yin shook his head and sighed. Although he was a saint, he did not know the secrets behind the creation of the heavens and earth, much less someone from beyond the chaos heavens. Let's not care about this person's background for now. However, we've already reached this step. This Yi Xian absolutely cannot be lost, Jie Yin said in a loud and clear voice. Amitabha. As the two saints of the West conversed, a compassionate Buddhist proclamation came out of Yi Xian's mouth. Yi Xian slowly opened his eyes as he looked at the two saints of the West with a peaceful smile. Junior brother, you are awake. Jie Yin's solemn expression was replaced by a peaceful one as he asked Yi Xian with concern. If not for your help, I wouldn't have been able to recover my cultivation level so quickly. Yi Xian pressed his palms together and bowed at the two saints of the West. He exuded a Buddha-like aura from beginning to end. Junior brother, you are the 7th heavenly ordained saint. You are also an important figure who brought glory to our Buddhist lineage. You are naturally blessed, said Kundi with a smile. Junior brother, tell me, have you obtained the Hong Meng immortal vapor? Jie Yin sat cross-legged beside Yi Xian and directly asked the question that Nu wanted to know the most. Senior brothers, I have lent the Hong Meng immortal vapor to Ancestor Mingyi during the battle with the ancient demon court. However, Ancestor Mingyi has led the Azura tribe back to the Nether Blood Sea. At the moment, the Hong Meng immortal vapor is not in your hands. Yi Xian pressed his palms together and said softly, Good. Jie Yin was overjoyed when he heard Yi Xian's answer. He knew that Yi Xian was indeed the 7th heavenly ordained saint. Although the Hong Meng immortal vapor was in Ancestor Mingyi's hands, it was not a difficult problem. Junior brother, you are now at the peak of the sage to be. Even Dong Huang Tai and Emperor Jun are no match for you. Although you have removed your ferocity and joined our Buddhist sect, you have not lost any of your cultivation. As long as you get the Hong Meng immortal vapor back, you will definitely become the 7th saint. Kundi smiled. Amitabha. Yi Xian chanted the name of Buddha in a low voice. Ancestor Mingi was born from the Nether Blood Sea, and can be said to be immortal. Now that the Hong Meng immortal vapor is in his hands, I am afraid that Yi Xian wanted to say something but hesitated. He didn't continue, but his meaning was already extremely obvious. The two Western saints looked at each other with a peaceful smile on their faces. Junior brother, you don't have to worry. Even though the Nether River was born from the Netherworld Blood Sea, and it's even said that the Nether River will never die as long as the Blood Sea doesn't dry up, the two of us wouldn't dare to take the primordial violet energy for ourselves. Jia-in looked at Kundi and said, Junior brother, it seems that you need to go to the Nether Blood Sea and get the Hong Meng immortal vapor back. Senior brother, don't worry. I will bring the Hong Meng immortal vapor back in half a month at most. With a wave of his sleeve, the wonderful 7 treasures tree appeared. When Zhuanti took a step forward, his entire body quietly disappeared from under the Bodhi tree. It was obvious that he had gone to the Netherworld Blood Sea to ask for the primordial violet chi for Yi Xian. At this moment, the people who wanted Yi Xian to become a sage the most were not the people of the celestial court or his so-called subordinates, but the two Western sages at this moment. Why did the two Western sages take the risk to convert Yi Xian? After all, Yi Xian was the 7th destined sage. As long as they converted Yi Xian into a Buddhist before he became a sage, after Yi Xian became a sage, there would be 3 sages in Western Buddhism. They would be able to fight against the 3 pure ones and not be at a disadvantage. This was the real intention of the two Western sages. Now that they knew where the Hong Meng immortal vapor was, the two Western sages would not delay. Kundi even went to the Nether Blood Sea personally. As long as he could get the Hong Meng immortal vapor back, he would be able to help Yi Xian become the 7th destined sage. Junior brother, this 1000 Buddha scripture is the lifelong cultivation method of Kundi and I. It includes all the Dharma and supernatural powers of Western Buddhism. It also contains many unique saint arts of Kundi and I. You should study it first and learn it when you become a saint in the future. Chapter 795. Out of nowhere, a golden scripture appeared in Jia-yin's hand, and he handed it to Yi Xian with great care. Obviously, this 10,000 Buddha scripture was the life's work of the two sages of the West. From this, it could be seen that after the two sages of the West converted Yi Xian, they had already regarded Yi Xian as one of their own. They were even more determined to nurture Yi Xian at all costs. Only by making Yi Xian the 7th heaven-ordained saint would Western Buddhism have 3 great sages, and no longer be under the 3 pure ones. Thank you, senior brother Jia-in. I will definitely study it well, and not let you down. Yi Xian held the 10,000 Buddha scripture in his hands, and bowed to Jia-in with his palms together. Junior brother, this Bodhi tree is the spiritual root of 10,000 Buddhas. Sitting under the tree will greatly benefit you in comprehending the 10,000 Buddha scripture. I still have some trivial matters to attend to, so I will take my leave first. If you have anything you don't understand about the 10,000 Buddha scripture, you can come to the back of the mountain to ask me, Jia-in said with a pleasant expression. Senior brother, please go ahead. I can comprehend this scripture on my own. Yi Xian nodded with a smile. Looking at Yi Xian's solemn expression, Jia-in felt comforted and no longer doubted Yi Xian. He rode a cloud and returned to the back of the mountain, leaving Yi Xian alone under the Bodhi tree. Whoosh whoosh, a cool breeze blew, causing the branches and leaves of the Bodhi tree to sway slightly. Yi Xian opened the 10,000 Buddha scripture in his hand and began to read it calmly. A Bodhi tree, a Buddha-like person, accompanied by the cool breeze, and with the Buddhist scripture in his hand, Yi Xian seemed to have really become an eminent monk. He buried his head in the 10,000 Buddha scripture. Not only was he comprehending the philosophy of Buddhism, but he was also studying the supreme supernatural powers of Buddhism. The sun rose and the moon set, and the stars moved. Even though this world was created by the two sages of the West, there was also the alternation of the sun and the moon. There were even stars twinkling in the sky, illuminating this world with starlight, and without a speck of dust. Under the Bodhi tree, Yi Xian slowly closed the 10,000 Buddha Sutra. The light of Buddha around him did not diminish in the slightest, but the peaceful smile on his face slowly disappeared, and gradually turned into a grim expression. What a soul-crossing Buddhist mantra! It almost consigned me to eternal damnation. Yi Xian whispered coldly. The expression on his face was ferocious and gloomy. Under the illumination of the Buddha's light, it gave off an extremely strange feeling. Yuan Ling has also appeared. Yi Xian narrowed his eyes slightly, and the Buddhist light in his eyes had already dissipated. What rose with it was an extremely terrifying and fierce look. He did not look like he had been enlightened at all. As expected, Yuan Ling was terrifying to the extreme. Even though he had entered the dojo of these two baldies, he hadn't been discovered by them. It seemed that I had to be very careful. Yi Xian's expression was extremely solemn. From the moment the two sages of the West used the soul-crossing Buddhist mantra on him, and even believed that he had been enlightened to Yuan Ling's arrival, Yi Xian had actually seen everything. In fact, the two sages of the West had made a huge mistake. And this mistake had also given Yi Xian a chance to escape. When Yi Xian had passed the first tribulation of the heavenly Tao, his body had produced that weak sacred power. It was also at the final moment when Yi Xian was about to be enlightened that this sacred power had saved him. This sacred power was extremely terrifying. It was completely different from the sacred power produced by virtue and virtue. Not only did it offset the two sages of the West's enlightenment, but it also concealed Yi Xian from the inside out. Even the two sages of the West did not notice anything strange. Yi Xian had relied on the sacred power in his body to accomplish this. This made Yi Xian very excited. For the time being, the two sages of the West were no longer a threat to him. The two sages of the West had also miscalculated this place. If Yi Xian had just stepped into this place, and the two sages had used the soul-crossing Buddhist mantra on him, Yi Xian would definitely have been enlightened. However, the two sages of the West wanted to play it safe and let Yi Xian enter the myriad Buddha spiritual pool to be enlightened by the Golden Lotus Buddha fire. Coincidentally, this also allowed Yi Xian to pass the first tribulation of the heavenly Tao. As if it was predestined, Yi Xian, who had passed the first tribulation of the heavenly Tao, underwent an earth-shattering change. The weak sacred power in his body had helped him resist the soul-crossing Buddhist mantra. However, what Yi Xian did not expect was that Yuan Ling would appear in front of him. This made Yi Xian even more shocked. He almost wanted to tear off his disguise and talk to Yuan Ling. However, in the end, Yi Xian held himself back. If he really tore off his disguise, not only would everything he had done before be for naught, it would alert the two sages of the West. It would also make Yuan Ling more cautious. It would be better for him to continue hiding. This was the most beneficial thing for him. Yuan Ling is too mysterious. He wants to steal my body and control the forbidden chapter of the immortal scripture. He also wants to control the heaven-destroying halberd. There must be too many secrets that I don't know about. Yi Xian murmured in a heavy voice. Now that I've fallen into the hands of the two sages of the West, Yuan Ling must be more anxious than I am. He definitely won't sit back and do nothing. This way, I can take advantage of the situation. If I can force him to fight the two sages of the West, it will only be beneficial to me. Yi Xian murmured in his sleep. The corner of his mouth curled into a cold smile, and a glint of light flashed across his eyes. Yi Xian sat cross-legged under the Bodhi tree deep in thought. He was constantly planning what he might encounter. He was also thinking about how to lure Yuan Ling to appear again, and use the two sages of the West to test Yuan Ling. Yuan Ling's appearance today has already alerted the enemy. For the time being, he shouldn't dare to appear again. Although the two sages of the West have let down their guard against me, I still have to be careful. For the time being, I'll comprehend the supernatural powers in the 10,000 Buddha scripture once. This can also be considered as collecting some interest from these two monks. Yi Xian murmured to himself. A look of determination flashed across his eyes. It had to be said that the 10,000 Buddha scripture was indeed the most precious treasure in the world. It included all kinds of great techniques of the Buddhist lineage. However, what really caught Yi Xian's attention was the sage's technique of the two sages of the West. The sage's technique couldn't be imparted to outsiders. Whether it was the so-called Daoyuo or sage-to-be, it was impossible for them to see one or two in their lifetime. Today Yi Xian obtained the 10,000 Buddha scripture. Naturally, he had to cherish this great opportunity. Although it wouldn't allow his cultivation to improve again, mastering the sage's technique would bring him an unimaginable improvement. Moreover, Yi Xian was now a bird in a cage. If he really showed any abnormality, the guide would be the first to know. This was definitely not the result that Yi Xian wanted to see. Comprehending the 10,000 Buddha scripture in his hand would be of great benefit to Yi Xian. Moreover, Yi Xian didn't want to escape from the two sages of the West for the time being, because Yuan Ling was more anxious than him. He had to think carefully about how to lure Yuan Ling out again, and let Yuan Ling fight with the two sages of the West. This was his real goal. Yi Xian knew that he was playing with fire. However, there was a saying that went, "Wealth comes from danger." If he didn't take the risk, how could Yi Xian find out who Yuan Ling's real identity was? Under the Bodhi tree, the spring breeze brought gentle rain, and the Buddha's light was auspicious. Yi Xian's gloomy face gradually disappeared and turned into a benevolent look again. He unfolded the 10,000 Buddha scripture and carefully comprehended it. There was nothing unusual about him at all. Chapter 796. 3,000 Sands, Buddhist Kingdom in the Palm. Rumble. The void turned illusory as strange phenomena appeared one after another. Yellow sand filled the sky, stirring up the wind and clouds in the world. The chanting of sutras from the Buddhist kingdom came from all directions. Phantoms of Buddhas appeared in all directions, and an illusory world appeared. Junior brother, this is the Buddhist kingdom in the palm. It's my own divine power. Not only does it have the ability to overturn heaven and earth, but it also has the supreme power to trap and destroy one's soul. Do you understand? Jane's 5 fingers were like mountains, and a bright holy light surrounded his palm. He was demonstrating his divine power to Yi Xian, and carefully teaching Yi Xian. A world in a grain of sand, a Bodhi in a leaf. Senior brother's divine power is amazing. I admire you very much. Yi Xian, who was wearing a white monk robe, put his palms together and bowed. His words were extremely sincere. Junior brother, although this is a sage's divine power, you can also use it with your current cultivation. It's just that you haven't become a sage, and can't use the divine power of heaven and earth. However, against a sage-to-be, this Buddhist kingdom in the palm will make you invincible, Jane said proudly. Thank you for your guidance, senior brother. Yi Xian bowed again, sincerely thanking Jane. The 10,000 Buddha scripture was indeed the most precious treasure of Buddhism, even though Yi Xian had disguised himself in front of Jane. These few days of comprehending the 10,000 Buddha scripture had given Yi Xian a lot of inspiration. Sages were indeed sages. Not to mention the Dharma in the 10,000 Buddha scripture. Just the many divine powers in it were an eye-opener for Yi Xian. Buddhist kingdom in the palm. 3,000 sands. Vajra-glazed body. Summer of heaven and earth. Buddha's heart lotus. 3,000 arts of suppressing hell. There were dozens of divine powers that dazzled Yi Xian. He admired the two sages of the West even more. Although they were enemies, Yi Xian admired the two sages of the West's cultivation and knowledge. Sages were indeed extraordinary. Yi Xian had to admit that his cultivation had improved significantly under Jane's guidance. Senior brother. Suddenly, a cloud appeared on the horizon. Taoist Juanti returned. When he appeared in front of Yi Xian and Jie Yin, his expression was gloomy. Seeing Kundi's gloomy appearance, Jane frowned and said, Junior brother, did something go wrong on this trip to the Nether Blood Sea? I'm ashamed that I couldn't bring the Hong Meng Immortal Qi back. Please forgive me. Zhuan Ti put his palms together and said apologetically. Jie Yin was stunned, and he said, Since we saints have arrived, How could Mingi dare not hand over the primordial violet energy? Senior brother, you don't know. I went to the Nether Blood Sea to ask for the Hong Meng Immortal Chi, but Mingi resisted desperately and was unwilling to hand it over. In the end, he exploded his body and merged with the Nether Blood Sea. Unless you destroy the entire Nether Blood Sea, you will attract the attention of the three pure ones, and I can only return empty-handed. How should I deal with this matter? Zhuan-Ti said with a gloomy face. Ancestor Mingi was at the peak of the sage-to-be. The Nether Blood Sea was the most difficult part of him to deal with. As long as the Nether Blood Sea was not destroyed, Ancestor Mingi would not die. Even a saint would have a headache. It was not that the saints could not kill the Nether River Patriarch, but in order to kill the Nether River Patriarch, they had to destroy the Nether Blood Sea first. However, the Nether Blood Sea was vast and endless, and there was the Azura clan in it. Destroying the Nether Blood Sea was equivalent to destroying an entire clan, which was no small matter for the saints. Humph Mingi! How dare he fight against the two saints of the West for the Hong Meng Immortal Chi? It seems that we have to find a reason to destroy the Nether Blood Sea. Jian whispered coldly, with a cold killing intent in his eyes. The two saints of the West were full of killing intent. At this moment, they did not have any Buddhist nature. Everything they did was to help Yi Xian become a saint. Only in this way could the Western religious sect prosper, and not be subordinate to the three pure ones. Anyone who dared to block their way would be killed by the two saints of the West, without any mercy. Senior brothers, don't be angry. Why don't you let me go to the Nether Blood Sea personally, and use Buddhism to influence him? After all, you lent him the Hong Meng Immortal Chi. As the saying goes, karma engenders each other. I think Mingi may be willing to return the Hong Meng Immortal Chi to me. Yi Xian put his palms together. No. Jane frowned. Jane frowned and said, you have just joined the Western religious sect. If you come out now, you will attract the killing intent of Nuwa and others. Moreover, Mingi wants to become a saint. I am afraid that even if you go to the Nether Blood Sea personally, he will not return the Hong Meng Immortal Chi to you. Yes, we can deal with Mingi, but if you really come out, Nuwa and Yuanshi will never let you go. If you are killed by a saint, how can we be at ease? Zhuan-Ti echoed. Looking at the two saints of the West rejecting him, Yi Xian's expression did not change, but he sneered secretly. He knew that the two saints of the West did not want to let him go, and they were afraid that other saints would know that he had joined the Buddhist sect. Senior brothers, don't worry. Since I have joined the Buddhist sect, I will change my appearance. This will save me a lot of trouble. As Yi Xian spoke, the light of Buddha rose around him. When the light of Buddha dissipated, his original appearance had disappeared. He had turned into a young monk, completely different from his previous appearance. Looking at Yi Xian's changed appearance, and the light of Buddha around him, the two saints of the West's eyes lit up. They were moved. I am Yi Xian. Greetings, senior brothers. From now on, there is no more Yi Xian in the world. Yi Xian put his palms together, and bowed to the two saints of the West, showing his Buddha nature. Good, good, good. Jane smiled and said good 3 times in a row. Zhuan-Ti opened his Dharma eye of heaven and earth, but he could not see Yi Xian's real body. A touch of surprise flashed across his eyes. Junior brother Qing Ming, have you cultivated the Dharma form of innumerable Buddhas? Zhuan-Ti asked in surprise. Senior brother, you flatter me. I have indeed cultivated the Dharma form of innumerable Buddhas. Yi Xian nodded and smiled. Hiss! Zhuan-Ti sucked in a breath of cold air. But his eyes were burning as he looked at Yi Xian. The Dharma form of innumerable Buddhas was his Dharma access. Not only could it change one's appearance, but it could also hide one's breath and transform everything in the world. There were too many transformations in the 3 realms, with the most famous being the Taoist's 36 heavenly astral transformations and 72 earthen fiend transformations. These were high-tier Taoist arts that the Lord of Primordial Beginning had passed down. In order to not lose to the 3 pure ones, Zhuan-Ti painstakingly created the Dharma form of innumerable Buddhas. This Dharma form of innumerable Buddhas was extremely powerful. It was even more difficult to cultivate than the Taoist sect's 36 transformations and the Disha's 72 transformations. Many Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in the Western sect could not cultivate this Dharma form because it was too harsh. However, although the Dharma form of innumerable Buddhas was extremely difficult to cultivate, it was also extremely terrifying. Even the saints could not accurately perceive the other's real body. Unless the saints investigated it personally, no one could expose the Dharma form of innumerable Buddhas. Chapter 797. However, Zhuanti did not expect Yi Xian to have cultivated his Dharma form of 10,000 Buddhas in just a few days. This made Zhuanti extremely excited and surprised. Good. Junior brother Qingming is indeed talented. In the future, our Western religious sect will definitely flourish. Even the three pure ones will not be afraid. Zhuanti laughed out loud. Since junior brother Qingming has cultivated the Dharma form of 10,000 Buddhas, we can be at ease when we come out. However, the Hongming immortal qi is of great importance. We must not attract the attention of others. Junior brother, you don't have to rush to the Nether Blood Sea. You should first stay in the lower realm Spirited Mountain to appease the Bodhisattvas and Buddhas. This can also stabilize the hearts of our Western religious sect. Jane pondered for a long time, and finally planned a route for Yi Xian to come out of the world. He also had to arrange a suitable identity for Yi Xian. Otherwise, the appearance of a sage to be in the Western religious sect would definitely attract the attention of the outside world. Rumble. Holy light shone between heaven and earth. A golden decree appeared out of nowhere. Jane wrote something on the golden decree continuously. It was not until 10 breaths later that he finished writing. Junior brother, take my decree to the lower realm Spirited Mountain. From now on, you will be Buddha Qingming of Spirited Mountain. All the Bodhisattvas and Buddhas will listen to your orders. This way, you will be able to do things in the outside world. Jane smiled and handed the decree to Yi Xian. Junior brother, before you leave, I want to entrust you with a few things. You must remember and never neglect them. Zhuanti kept reminding Yi Xian. The first thing was that the battle between the two celestial court 10,000 years ago had pierced through the sky. Hundreds of millions of miles of sky could not be healed. From time to time, meteorites and galaxies would pour into the three realms, causing a boundless catastrophe to all living things. None of the four major states were spared. The great orthodoxies opened the seal formation, but it could only alleviate the disaster. It could not really solve the problem. When Yi Xian went to Spirited Mountain, the first thing he had to do was to pacify the billions of Buddhists in the Aparagodania continent. He also had to use his great divine ability to strengthen the seal enchantment, so that the billions of Buddhists would not be affected by the calamity. The second thing was that Yi Xian's identity had been confirmed. He was transformed from the chaotic golden lotus, and had always been by the side of the two sages of the West. He was also the Bodhisattva of the Western religious sect. Today, when the catastrophe of the world began, he was born in human form, and became the junior brother of the two sages of the West. His Buddhist name was Qingming. The third thing was that after Yi Xian arrived at Spirited Mountain, he would become the first Buddha of Spirited Mountain. All the Bodhisattvas and Buddhas would have to listen to his orders. Yi Xian would also rise from Spirited Mountain. At that time, he would find an excuse to go to the Nether Blood Sea and take back the Hongmeng immortal qi. Following the two sages of the West's earnest advice, Yi Xian nodded slowly to show that he had remembered it. This also made the two sages of the West feel slightly relieved. Then, the sage-to-be sent Yi Xian away from Spirited Mountain. Junior brother, when you take back the Hongmeng immortal qi, you will definitely be able to comprehend the opportunity to become a saint. At that time, you and I will not be afraid of the three pure ones. The three realms will respect the Western religious sect, the two sages of the West said with a smile. Don't worry, senior brothers. I will definitely live up to your expectations. Yi Xian's light of Buddha shone brightly. He put his palms together and chanted the name of Buddha. Under the gaze of the two sages of the West, an auspicious cloud rose under Yi Xian's feet, and he directly walked into the distant world. Looking at Yi Xian, who had already left Spirited Mountain, the smile on Zhuanti's face gradually disappeared. Then, it turned into a touch of seriousness. He looked at the guide and said, "Senior brother, are you really not worried about Yi Xian leaving?" Haha. The guide smiled slightly and looked at Yi Xian's departing figure. He said, "Don't worry, junior brother. The soul exorcism Buddhist voice has succeeded. He is no longer Yi Xian, but our junior brother Qing Ming. Didn't you and I already decide that he will go to Spirited Mountain? Our Western religious sect has always been suppressed by the three pure ones. This time, Yi Xian has joined our Buddhist sect. We are only waiting for him to take back the Hong Meng immortal qi. When he enters the Saint Realm, it will also be the time for us to fight against the three pure ones," the guide said unpredictably. "I hope everything goes well." Zhuanti sighed. He did not know why he always felt uneasy in his heart. However, he could not find the source of this uneasiness. This feeling made him extremely uncomfortable. After leaving Spirited Mountain and crossing the Sea of Bitterness, a golden Buddhist door appeared on the horizon. As long as one stepped through this golden Buddhist door, they would be in the boundless luminous starry sky. Buzz! Heaven and earth teleportation, so close yet so far. Yi Xian finally walked out of the Western Paradise and appeared in the starry sky. Rumble! The sea of stars churned and large stars stood in great numbers. Yi Xian stood in the starry sky. The Buddhist light around him was resplendent and dazzling, but his expression became extremely gloomy. He came out. He really came out. Yi Xian had temporarily survived a life and death calamity. He even walked out of the Western Pure Land and was considered to have escaped the control of the two saints of the West. Whoosh! Yi Xian spat out a mouthful of turbid air. A loud explosion came from thousands of miles away in the starry sky. If Yi Xian escaped from the two saints of the West in the past, he would definitely hide in the Earth immortal world and conceal his identity until he passed the three tribulations of the heavenly Tao. However, Yi Xian's thoughts were different now. He wanted to use the two saints of the West to force Yuanling out. If he could make the two saints of the West and Yuanling fight each other, this would be exactly what Yi Xian wanted. Moreover, Yi Xian now had the decree of the two saints of the West in his hands. The Spirited Mountain in the lower realm was completely under his command. This would also allow him to do things that were beneficial to him. Unfortunately, he had now turned into Buddha Qing Ming. He could not expose the truth that he was Yi Xian, nor could he return to the 33rd Celestial Court. This was something that he had no choice but to do. The world is like a chess game, and all living beings are chess pieces. Who is the chess piece, and who is the chess player is still unknown. Yi Xian's lips curled into a sneer. The Buddhist light around him shone brightly. He turned into a stream of light and surged toward the Earth Immortal World. Earth Immortal World, a Paragodania continent. The world was dark, and the sun and moon did not shine. The stars in the sky could be seen through the cracked sky. From time to time, there were meteorites falling from the sky. There was also a vast river of stars pouring down. It gave people a feeling that the world was about to be destroyed. However, they were all blocked by a heaven-sealing formation and were annihilated in the sky. From time to time, bodhisattvas and arhats could be seen shuttling back and forth in the sky. They were constantly bringing spiritual stones and magic weapons to the heaven-sealing formation to prevent the broken sky from bringing another destructive disaster to the Aparagodania continent. Not only the Aparagodania continent, but the other three continents were also the same. Back then, the two celestial court activated the heaven and earth ultimate formation and broke through the heavens for hundreds of millions of miles. The extent of the impact was unimaginable. No one knew how many creatures died in this catastrophe. Even after 10,000 years, the vitality of the four continents had not recovered much. The sky was filled with yellow sand and billowing dust. Yi Xian was wearing a white monk's robe. A Buddhist light rose behind him. He stepped barefoot in the yellow sand with a smile on his face. Under the reflection of the stars in the sky, he looked sacred and majestic. He gave people a deep sense of reverence. Chapter 798. Yellow sand filled the sky as the Milky Way poured into heaven and earth. The entire Aparagodania continent looked beautiful, but in reality, it was a scene of misery. Countless living beings were in the depths of fire. The boundless sky was pierced through, and millions of miles of land had fallen. The battle between the two great celestial court had finally started, a catastrophe of heaven and earth. The disasters and consequences it caused were unimaginable. The Aparagodania continent was the foundation of Buddhism in the West. It was said to have millions of Buddhists. Unfortunately, the once peaceful land of Buddhism was now in ruins. Only yellow sand covered the sky and earth. Every day, there were mortals buried in the yellow sand. Yi Xian walked forward with his bare feet. Along the way, he saw withered bones all over the ground. Some belonged to humans, some belonged to demons, and there were also many skeletons of demonic beasts. In the yellow sand that covered the sky, it was like purgatory on earth. The 6 desires were emotionless, and heaven and earth were heartless. Although Yi Xian had a merciful smile on his face, there was only indifference and emotionlessness in his eyes. Even if all living beings died tragically in the world, due to the catastrophe of heaven and earth, and a large part of the reason was related to him, Yi Xian did not feel too much. The cycle of heaven and earth, the cycle of all living beings. From prosperity to decline, this was a necessary process. However, Yi Xian believed that he had sped up this process. As for the life and death of all living beings, it was also caused by their weakness. Weakness was the original sin. Yi Xian had always believed in this principle. Therefore, he had to make himself stronger. He did not want to be inferior to others. He had to truly stand above the 9 heavens and look down on all living beings. The stars in the sky twinkled, and the yellow sand danced wildly on the ground. Yi Xian faced the moonlight and walked through the yellow sand. He walked from night to day, and from day to night. He walked all the way to the west, and the Buddhist aura around him became more and more peaceful. He summoned clouds and rain, cast spells and bestowed medicine, expiated the souls of the dead, and mourned the living. As Yi Xian walked through the Aparagodania continent, he had to promote Buddhism wherever he went. He used Buddhism to save all living beings, and countless Buddhists knelt and kowtowed to him, chanting his great name. Of course, the so-called name was not Yi Xian, but his Buddhist name, Qing Ming. This was because Yi Xian knew that when he reappeared in the 3 realms, the name Yi Xian could no longer be used. He wanted to become Qing Ming, to mess up the world, and achieve his goal. Step by step. As for his promotion of the Dharma to save all living beings, it was just to build momentum for him. His good deeds. Spirit Mountain, Great Thunderclap Temple. Spiritual energy filled the sky, and the light of Buddha shone brightly. The Buddhist bell reverberated between heaven and earth, and the sound of chanting filled the sky. The Great Thunderclap Temple stood tall, and there were even phantoms of bodhisattvas and Buddhas looming in the void. Who are you? Halt! There were 2 novice monks guarding the entrance at the foot of Spirited Mountain. When Yi Xian appeared in the air, the 2 novice monks frowned and scolded him coldly. I am Qing Ming. I want to see Duo Bao Rulai. Yi Xian smiled kindly. The Buddhist light behind him was dazzling, causing the 2 novice monks to be stunned. Just the aura that Yi Xian emitted caused the 2 of them to be shocked. They knew that this person was definitely a supreme expert of the Buddhist sect, and wasn't someone they could afford to offend. Please wait a moment. I will go and report this. The 2 little novice monks put away their negligence and hurriedly chanted a Buddhist name, and were about to leave. However, before the 2 of them could go and report, a golden cloud suddenly rose from the Tempest Temple and slowly drifted towards the foot of Spirited Mountain. Amitba. A Buddhist chant came from the golden cloud. Duo Bao Rulai was sitting cross-legged on the golden lotus. Behind him were Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. There were also 3,000 Buddhas and Bodhisattvas standing in all directions. At this moment, they all looked at Yi Xian. Greetings, Uncle Master Qing Ming. Duo Bao Rulai pressed his palms together as the golden lotus beneath him quietly dissipated. He slowly walked towards Yi Xian in the air, and when he arrived in front of Yi Xian, he even humbly bowed to Yi Xian. This scene caused the 2 novice monks to be stunned on the spot. They were unable to recover from their shock for a long time. Greetings, Buddha Qing Ming. The Bodhisattvas of the heavens, the various Buddhas, the 3,000 truths, the 18 arhats, and the various Buddhist sects all bowed to Yixian. The Buddhist chants from their mouths resounded through the heavens, and the Buddhist light that rippled through the heavens gave off a boundless feeling. Looking at this scene, Yixian smiled peacefully. However, there was a strange feeling in his heart. He did not expect that he would be in charge of the great thunderclap temple of Spirited Mountain, which he had a deep grudge with in the past. Every dog has its day. Yixian could not help but think that if Duo Baorilai knew that this Buddha Qingming in front of him was Yixian in the past, he wondered how he would feel. I already know that the saint has summoned me. Please stay in the great thunderclap temple. I will report everything to you slowly. Please, Uncle Master. Duo Baorilai was extremely humble. He was inviting Yixian. However, if one were to pay attention, they would notice that Duo Baorilai's eyes were wandering. He had been secretly peeking at Yixian. His eyes would flash with surprise from time to time. It was no wonder that Duo Baorilai looked like this. It was because the two sages of the West had sent an oral order. They said that their junior brothers had been born and would stay in the great thunderclap temple of Spirited Mountain. All the Buddhas of Spirited Mountain had to listen to Yixian's orders. Duo Baorilai naturally did not dare to disobey the saint's order. However, he had always been the Buddha of the West, and had always been in charge of Spirited Mountain of the West. At this moment, Yixian's arrival naturally made him feel uncomfortable. After all, no one would be happy when their power was taken away. However, the saint's will could not be disobeyed. Duo Baorilai naturally did not dare to have any complaints. Moreover, Duo Baorilai was very curious about one thing. He had never heard of Qingming. Since when did the two sages of the West have such a junior brother? Of course, Duo Baorilai did not dare to ask about this. He only had doubts about Yixian's identity. He could only test Yixian in the future to see what relationship he had with the two sages of the West. Accompanied by Duo Baorilai and all the Buddhas of Spirited Mountain, Yixian passed through the mountain gate and walked towards the great thunderclap temple step by step. It was also at this moment that 81 bells were rung. This was also to gather everyone in Spirited Mountain to gather at the great thunderclap temple. The great thunderclap temple, the flag of the Western sect, was the orthodoxy established by the two sages of the West. Golden lotus platforms bloomed in the void, and golden mist rose from the spiritual pond. There were bodhisattvas sitting upright, arhats standing upright, and 8 division heavenly dragons floating in the void. Yixian wore a white monk robe and sat cross-legged on the golden lotus of the Buddha. Beside him were Duo Baorilai and Dipankara. Uncle Master Qingming, did you bring the decrees of the two sect masters? Duo Baorilai put his palms together and bowed to Yixian. Buzz! A beam of golden light spread out, and the saint's decree suddenly appeared. Golden Buddhist scriptures rippled in the Great Laying Temple, causing Duo Baorilai's expression to change slightly. He quickly knelt down and kowtowed to the decree. Chapter 799. Duo Baorilai was not the only one. When the decree of the two sages of the West appeared, the entire Great Thunderclap Temple was filled with chants of Buddhist names. All the bodhisattvas and Buddhas knelt down with pious looks on their faces. My Dharma name is Qingming. My 2 senior brothers, Zhu and Ti, asked me to temporarily guard the holy mountain in the West. I have to quell the disaster that the catastrophe of heaven and earth has brought to hundreds of millions of Buddhists. I will also die. Everyone present can carry forward the essence of Buddhism and truly save the world from this disaster. Yixian sat cross-legged on the golden lotus of Buddha, as a light of Buddha rose behind him. His vast and compassionate voice resounded throughout Spirited Mountain, prompting all the bodhisattvas and Buddhas to respond, chanting the merciful voice of Buddha. Martial Uncle, this is the book of Spirited Mountain. From Arhat Bodhisattva to Buddhas and Venerables, everything is recorded in the book of Spirited Mountain. Please take a look. Duo Baorilai flipped his hand, and a golden book appeared. He respectfully handed it to Yixian to read. The Spirit Mountain of the West seemed peaceful, but the forces within were actually quite complicated. Duo Baorilai was only the ruler, but he was definitely not the existence with the strongest cultivation. At this moment, Yi Xian was constantly flipping through the Spirit Mountain book. After an hour, he finally finished reading the Spirit Mountain book. He now had a clear understanding of the situation of Spirit Mountain in the west. Duo Bao Rilai used to be a disciple of the Tongtian. Later, because of the investiture of the gods, he joined the two sages of the west, and could be considered an in-name disciple of the two sages of the west. He also became the master of the western sacred mountain, and was in charge of all matters of the mountain. Ancient Buddha Dipankara was known as Taoist Dipankara in the past. Like Duo Bao Rilai, he had switched allegiance to the western sect during the Great God Investiture Tribulation. However, Dipankara's cultivation level was extremely high, and he had just entered the ranks of sage to be. Apart from the two of them, some bodhisattvas, venerables, and arhats were also from the Taoist lineage in the past. Clearly, the Great God Conferment Tribulation was an opportunity for the Western sect to rise. In addition to these people, there were also 4 great Buddhas who were cultivating in the depths of Spirited Mountain. These 4 great Buddhas were sage to be figures and did not appear in the outside world all year round. Unless Spirited Mountain encountered a great disaster, these 4 great Buddhas would not appear in the outside world. Where are the 4 great Buddhas? Yi Xian looked around and didn't miss the 4 great Buddhas. This made him speak peacefully and look at Duo Bao Rilai. Martial uncle, the 4 great Buddhas have been in seclusion for many years, cultivating the Vajrabodhi heart. They only want to peek into the saint realm, so they didn't come. Duo Bao Rilai smiled flatteringly, a strange look flashing in his eyes. Uncle Master Qingming, please don't be offended. Those who cultivate the Vajrabodhi heart are emotionless. This is also the greatest foundation of Spirited Mountain. Moreover, the 4 great Buddhas are all sage to be. Naturally, they are not under the jurisdiction of Spirited Mountain. Dipankara recited the name of Buddha in a low voice. He was neither servile nor overbearing to Yi Xian from beginning to end. To be honest, Dipankara was detached from worldly affairs, and was now a sage to be. If Yi Xian hadn't come with the decree of the 2 sages of the West, he wouldn't have come. His appearance here was to give face to the 2 sages of the West. As for Yi Xian, he didn't think much of him. Stepping into the sage to be was extraordinary. Except for the 6 great sages of the world, the sage to be could be regarded as the supreme figure. Such figures naturally had their own pride. Even the Buddhists were no exception. Do you mean to say that once you become a sage to be, you can look down on Spirited Mountain's Buddhists? Yi Xian looked at Dipankara with a smile. His face was even more peaceful, and the Buddha's light around him gave people a feeling of bathing in the spring breeze. However, the bodhisattvas and Buddhas present were a little breathless. They looked at Yi Xian with a touch of surprise. Although Yi Xian seemed to be easygoing, there was a hidden needle in his words. How could the bodhisattvas and Buddhas not be surprised? They didn't know why Yi Xian had offended Dipankara when he had just assumed command of Spirited Mountain. Stepping into the sage to be is extraordinary. As a Buddhist disciple, we must be kind. However, some of the Buddhist rules are no longer applicable to sage to be figures. Don't you know that, Buddha Qingming? Dipankara frowned and said in a low voice. From beginning to end, Dipankara didn't see Yi Xian's cultivation. In his mind, Yi Xian was at most a sage to be like him. If it weren't for the decree of the 2 sages of the West, he wouldn't have been so polite to Yi Xian. If Yi Xian was the master of Spirited Mountain, Dipankara naturally didn't want to oppose Yi Xian. However, Dipankara also heard from Yi Xian's words that the new master of Spirited Mountain seemed to rely on the support of the 2 sages of the West. He didn't care about the sage to be at all. Whether it was because he didn't want to be controlled by Yi Xian, or because of his pride as a sage to be, Dipankara naturally couldn't lower his head to Yi Xian. Moreover, Dipankara had a high status in Spirited Mountain. Yi Xian was just a newcomer. If he lowered his head to Yi Xian, wouldn't it be a joke to others? At this moment, Duo Bao Rilai narrowed his eyes and took a few steps back without leaving a trace. The bodhisattvas and Buddhas were also silent. At this moment, Dipankara and Yi Xian were at loggerheads. They didn't dare to get involved. After all, they couldn't afford to offend either of them. greed, anger, and infatuation, resentment, and hatred. You, a monk, have only just entered the quasi-saint stage, yet you already have a demonic thought in your heart. How can you be worthy of becoming a member of my Buddha? Buddha Qingming, are you slandering me? Dipankara's expression changed. He looked at Yi Xian with an unfriendly gaze. Men, take Dipankara down and send him to Juyo Tower to repent for 30,000 years. Suddenly, Yi Xian said mercifully. This made Duo Bao Rulai, and the Bodhisattvas and Buddha's expressions changed drastically. They didn't expect Yi Xian to say such ignorant words. Dipankara was one of the Buddhas of the Western Sacred Mountain. He was more respected than Duo Bao Rulai. Moreover, Dipankara had just become a sage-to-be. Looking at the great Laying Temple of Sacred Mountain, who could take him down except for the 4 Buddhas who never appeared? Qingming, don't think that I'll bow down to you just because you have the support of 2 sect masters. Ancient Buddha Dipankara was enraged. His gaze towards Yi Xian became extremely unfriendly. An ancient bronze lamp appeared in his hand, and its green flame flickered in the air, faintly collapsing the space around it. Yi Xian didn't seem to see Dipankara's anger. Instead, he looked calmly at Duo Bao Rulai and the others. He said in a peaceful voice, Dipankara's evil roots are deep. Why don't you take him down? What? Duo Bao Rulai's face was gloomy. He smiled wryly, and could only lower his head without saying a word. Obviously, he couldn't afford to offend Yi Xian, nor could he afford to offend Dipankara. Silence was the best solution. Qingming Buddha, you've just entered Sacred Mountain, but you want to use me to establish your power. I'm afraid you've made the wrong decision. I'll certainly report this to the 2 sect masters, and ask them to give me justice. Ancient Buddha Dipankara was extremely furious. He could tell that Buddha Qingming wanted to use him to establish his might. If it wasn't for the fact that Buddha Qingming had a great relationship with the 2 Western saints, ancient Buddha Dipankara would have already attacked Yi Xian. Humph! Dipankara mounted a golden cloud, and was about to float away with the ancient bronze lamp in his hand. Obviously, he was going to report Yi Xian to the 2 Western sages. Unfortunately, Yi Xian's deep and compassionate voice suddenly rang out before Dipankara could walk out of the great Laying Temple. A Buddha's palm suddenly appeared above Dipankara's head. Evil creature, that you're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.